My name is Caridwen White, and I was 34 the year my family showed me the exact exchange rate for a daughter's loyalty. For over a decade, I played the good soldier. I worked as a senior forensic accountant for my father's logistics empire in Bentonville, Arkansas. I tracked every penny, reconciled every account, and kept the machinery running quietly in the dark. I was the invisible safety net for a family that treated my presence like a utility. You expect water when you turn the tap, and they expected my silence when they handed me their ledgers. But my real life, the one I lived after the spreadsheets were closed, was in my art studio. My parents spent years telling me to get a real job and forget about art. They called my paintings a pathetic distraction from corporate reality. When my first solo exhibition opened, I stood in the center of a downtown gallery waiting for the 3 people whose approval I still stupidly wanted. They refused to attend. I did not argue. I did not call them crying. I simply looked at the focal piece of my exhibition, a painting built on a foundation of shredded duplicate financial records I had printed from my brother's hidden shadow ledgers. A month later, my father was visiting a local gallery for corporate art when he suddenly stopped in front of one specific painting and refused to move. He saw the routing numbers. He saw his own federal crimes woven into the canvas. I need you to understand the specific kind of coldness it takes to build a trap this precise. I did not wake up one morning and decide to ruin my family. They built their own ruin, dollar by stolen dollar, and I simply provided the frame. They thought because I was quiet, I was blind. They thought because I balanced their books, I would cover their tracks. They were wrong on both counts. The truth is, people who yell only know how to fight other people who yell. When you give them silence, they do not know what to do. They walk right into the snare. Welcome to Linda Vengeance, where ordinary women face impossible family betrayals and answer with a steady hand instead of a raised voice. If you have ever poured your soul into something only to have your own blood call it worthless, you are in the right place. Drop a comment telling me your age, and be sure to subscribe because this story starts with an empty room and ends with a federal indictment. The condensation on my champagne glass turned to ice water against my palm. I stood in the center of the gallery, letting the chill seep into my fingers. The walls were stark white, the floor polished concrete that echoed every footstep. It was opening night, my opening night. The air smelled of expensive perfume floor wax and the faint, sharp tang of drying oil paint. For 2 hours, I had watched the glass entry doors swing open and shut, admitting local art critics, downtown business owners, and people who simply wanted free wine. I watched the door for a bespoke charcoal suit. I watched for my mother, Patricia, with her signature pearl necklace. I watched for my brother, Preston. They were not there. A woman in a silk scarf paused beside me holding a program. She pointed to my largest canvas and asked how long it took to develop such a fascinating base layer. I offered her a practiced, measured smile. I told her the foundation took months of careful auditing to build. She laughed, thinking I was making a clever metaphor about the artistic process. She walked away to find the cheese tray. I remained standing in the center of the room. My phone vibrated against my hip. A single, sharp buzz. I set my champagne glass on a passing waiter's tray and reached into my pocket. The screen cast a pale blue light across my hands. It was a text message from Patricia. The words were clipped and efficient. Critical logistics board meeting ran late. Preston needs to review the quarterly projections. Cannot make the gallery. Have a nice night. I read the lines twice. The screen dimmed and went black. My jaw tightened until my back teeth ground together. I did not sigh. I did not excuse myself to the restroom to wipe away tears. I had run out of tears for these people a very long time ago. The sting in my chest was old, familiar, and dull. It was the exact same feeling I had when I was 16 years old, standing in my father's study. I remembered that day perfectly. I had spent 3 weeks painting a portrait of the Ozark foothills. I carried the heavy canvas into the study seeking a single word of praise. The room smelled of expensive leather and aged scotch. Richard did not look up from his desk for a full minute. When he finally lifted his head, he set his pen down, slid a heavy silver calculator across the mahogany wood, and met my eyes. He told me art was a hobby for people who could not do math. He told me to learn the ledgers or find another house to live in. So I learned the ledgers. I became a forensic accountant. I learned to track the money other people tried to hide. I became very good at seeing the numbers that were missing. I pocketed my phone and walked toward the far wall of the gallery. I stopped in front of the piece the woman in the silk scarf had admired. The placard on the wall read, "Redacted, mixed media on canvas." The painting was a sprawling, abstract composition of crimson and deep black oil paint. But the power of the piece was not in the color. It was in the technique. My favorite artistic method is sgraffito. It is the careful, deliberate act of scratching away the thick top layers of paint to reveal the hidden truths underneath. There is no better technique for an auditor. The canvas was not smooth. It possessed deep ridges, dips, and raised edges. The texture was thick and aggressive. Any art critic would call it a bold use of papier-mâché. They would be wrong. The texture was composed of duplicate corporate documents. I did not steal original files. Stealing physical documents from my father's logistics firm would be a severe crime. It would invalidate any whistleblower protections and leave me legally vulnerable. I am far too cautious for that. Instead, I used my authorized clearance as the senior accountant. Over the past 6 months, I noticed irregularities in the employee pension fund. Small fractions of capital were bleeding out of the main accounts and filtering through 3 layers of encrypted shell companies. My brother Preston managed those internal accounts. I stayed late at the office printing duplicate copies of Preston's shadow ledgers. I took those printed pages back to my private studio. I fed them through a micro shredder until the evidence of his fraud was reduced to thousands of tiny paper strips. I mixed those strips with an archival binding paste and spread them across the canvas using a steel palette knife. Once the paste dried hard as stone, I covered it in layers of thick crimson oil paint. Then I took a sharp etching tool and began scratching. I dragged the tool through the red paint, exposing tiny fragments of the white paper beneath. If you stood back, it looked like raw emotion. If you stepped closer, you could see letters and numbers. A local critic stepped up to the painting while I watched. He leaned in close, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. I watched his eyes track over a specific scratch in the crimson paint near the bottom left corner. Beneath that scratch, a tiny fragment of white paper showed through. On that fragment, part of an offshore routing number was clearly visible. The critic did not know what it meant. He only saw interesting typography embedded in the art. He nodded to himself, making a note on his clipboard. I knew my father's corporate buyer frequented this gallery. I knew the logistics firm was preparing to open a new headquarters building next month, and they needed respectable modern art for the executive boardroom. I had designed this entire exhibition knowing exactly who would eventually walk through those glass doors. My parents thought my art was a useless pursuit. They thought my numbers were the only thing of value. I had simply combined the two. The gallery owner walked over to me holding 2 fresh glasses of champagne. He handed me one and smiled. He told me the exhibition was a triumph. He mentioned that a corporate buyer from a major local firm had already called to schedule a private viewing for the following week. He said the buyer was looking for a centerpiece for a high-level boardroom. I took the glass from his hand. The crystal was cold and solid against my skin. I looked at the painting, then back to the gallery owner. I told him I looked forward to it. I took my first sip of champagne for the night. The trap was set, and all I had to do now was wait for them to step into it. The cold condensation gathering on the stem of my untouched champagne glass mirrored the temperature in my chest. It was 4 weeks before the disastrous gala projection. My debut solo exhibition at a minimalist downtown Bentonville gallery was in full swing. The room hummed with the quiet chatter of corporate colleagues, junior auditors, and local art critics. They drifted past the stark white walls, nodding at my textured canvases, but the 3 RSVPs that actually mattered remained conspicuously unfulfilled. I stood near the entrance, tracing the rim of my glass, waiting for a bespoke charcoal suit or a familiar pearl necklace. My phone vibrated against the fabric of my tailored slacks. A single, sharp buzz. I stepped away from a group of regional managers and retrieved the device. The screen illuminated my palm with a pale blue glow. It was a text from my mother, Patricia. The message was efficient and devoid of warmth. Critical logistics board meeting ran late. Preston needs to review the quarterly projections. Cannot make the gallery. Have a nice night. I read the words twice. The screen dimmed and went black. I did not sigh. I did not retreat to the restroom to fix my makeup or shed tears. The stinging sensation behind my ribs was an old, familiar companion. It was the exact same tightening I felt when I was 16 years old. The memory surfaced sharp and uninvited. I was standing in my father's mahogany-paneled study. The room smelled of aged scotch and expensive cigar smoke. I held a vibrant watercolor painting of the Ozark foothills. I had spent 3 weeks perfecting the light on the leaves, seeking a single nod of approval from Richard White. He did not look up from his quarterly reports for a full minute. When he finally lifted his head, he did not look at the canvas. He reached into his desk drawer, withdrew a heavy silver calculator, and slid it across the polished wood. The device stopped inches from my hand with a dull thud. He leaned back in his leather chair and looked at me with cold, flat eyes. Art is a hobby for people who cannot do math, he said. Learn the ledgers, Caradwin, or find another house to live in. I pocketed my phone in the present, letting the memory dissolve back into the dark corners of my mind. I had learned the ledgers. I became a senior forensic accountant for his logistics empire. I learned to track the capital other people tried to hide. I became the invisible safety net for a family that treated my presence like a utility. You expect water when you turn the tap, and they expected my silence when they handed me their financial records. I smoothed my suit jacket and walked back into the center of the room, projecting an aura of effortless competence. A junior auditor from my floor named Marcus was standing too close to the focal piece of the exhibition. The placard beside it read, "Redacted." It was a sprawling, abstract composition of crimson and deep black oil paint. Marcus leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. His nose was mere inches from the canvas. I stepped up beside him, keeping my breathing slow and even. "Fascinating texture, Caradwin," he said. He pointed to a section near the bottom frame. "The base layer almost looks like shredded paper. I can see little fragments of text where you scratched the red paint away. Is that dot matrix printing?" My favorite artistic technique is sgraffito. It is the deliberate act of scratching away top layers of paint to reveal the hidden truths underneath. There is no better method for a forensic accountant. I offered Marcus a practiced, measured smile. "I find the rigid structure of discarded data provides an interesting contrast to the chaos of the oil paint," I said. "Do you not agree, Marcus?" He nodded, stepping back. "It is very striking. I just did not expect an accountant to be so creative." "We all have our evening hobbies," I replied, guiding him smoothly toward the catered cheese tray. I watched him walk away, my pulse maintaining a steady, resting rate. The true tension of the room lay hidden beneath that crimson paint. Marcus had no idea how close he was to a federal crime scene. I did not steal original physical documents from my father's firm. Stealing proprietary records would be a felony. It would invalidate any whistleblower protections and leave me legally vulnerable. I am far too cautious to make a mistake like that. Instead, I used my authorized security clearance. 6 months ago, during a routine internal audit, I noticed a discrepancy in the employee pension fund. Small fractions of capital were bleeding out of the main accounts. The money was filtering through 3 layers of encrypted shell companies. My brother Preston managed those internal accounts. Preston was loud, arrogant, and prone to careless mistakes. He thought he was brilliant, but his digital footprint was as subtle as a muddy boot on a white rug. I stayed late at the office, night after night. The HVAC system hummed in the empty building while I traced the missing funds. I cracked the first layer of encryption easily. The second took a week. When I broke the third layer, I found the routing numbers. The money was not going to Preston. It was flowing into an offshore entity registered under a defunct limited liability company. I pulled the incorporation records for that company. The registered agent was listed under Harper, my sister-in-law's maiden name. Preston was not the mastermind. He was just the mule. Harper was the architect, subsidizing her lavish country club lifestyle with the retirement savings of blue-collar warehouse workers. And my father, the great Richard White, was too busy expanding his empire to notice his own family draining his foundation. I did not confront them. A confrontation would only give them time to destroy the digital trail. Instead, I printed duplicate copies of the shadow ledgers on my own time. I carried those printed pages back to my private studio. The room smelled of turpentine and raw canvas. I fed the duplicate ledgers through a micro-shredder until the evidence of their fraud was reduced to thousands of tiny paper strips. I mixed those strips with an archival binding paste. I spread the thick gray mixture across the large canvas using a steel palette knife, shaping it into deep ridges and sharp dips. Once the paste dried, hard as stone, I covered it in heavy layers of crimson oil paint. Then I took a sharp etching tool and began scratching. I dragged the tool through the red paint, exposing tiny fragments of the white paper beneath. If you stood back, it looked like raw emotion. If you stepped closer, you could see the truth. An offshore routing number here, a fractional dollar amount there, the watermark of a shell bank. The gallery began to empty as the evening wore on. The caterers collected the discarded napkins and empty champagne flutes. The low hum of conversation faded, leaving only the soft jazz playing over the hidden speakers. I stood alone in the center of the room, looking at Redacted. My family had boycotted my debut because they thought my art was worthless. They had no idea my art was currently holding the definitive proof of their impending ruin. The gallery owner, a tall man with silver hair, walked over to me. He held a clipboard against his chest and offered a warm, genuine smile. "A very successful opening, Caradwen," he said. "We sold 3 of the smaller landscapes, and I have some excellent news regarding the focal piece." I turned to him, keeping my expression neutral. "Redacted is not for sale," I reminded him. "We agreed on that." I know he said holding up a hand, and I told the client that. But he is a very persistent man. He is outfitting a new corporate headquarters across town, and he insists on seeing the most powerful pieces we have. I told him this piece was display only, but he demanded a private viewing. He said he wants art that represents the ruthless nature of modern commerce. I felt a cold, precise thrill settle in my stomach. "What is the client's name?" I asked. The owner checked his clipboard. "Richard White, the CEO of the logistics firm. He is coming in next Tuesday afternoon." I looked back at the canvas. My father was coming to the gallery. The man who handed me a calculator and told me to forget about painting was about to walk into a room and unknowingly admire a portrait of his own destruction. "I will be here Tuesday," I said. My voice was quiet and even. I would not miss it for the world. Tuesday afternoon sunlight cut through the tall front windows of the gallery, casting long, sharp shadows across the polished concrete floor. The space was quiet. The opening weekend crowds were gone, leaving only the low hum of the climate control system and the faint scent of espresso drifting from the back office. I stood on the raised mezzanine loft, a structural feature that allowed me an unobstructed view of the main exhibition floor while remaining cloaked in the dim light of the second level. My hands rested flat against the cool glass railing. I wore a simple black turtleneck and tailored trousers blending into the dark backdrop. I was not there to mingle. I was there to observe. At precisely 2 o'clock, the heavy glass entry doors swung inward. My father, Richard White, stepped over the threshold. He wore a navy pinto-striped suit tailored to hide the slight rounding of his shoulders. His posture was rigid, projecting the manufactured authority of a man accustomed to giving orders and watching others scramble to obey. Beside him walked my mother, Patricia. She held a designer leather handbag in the crook of her arm, her signature pearl necklace resting against her collarbone. She surveyed the minimalist walls with a look of mild boredom, treating the gallery like a mandatory chore rather than an experience. The gallery owner emerged from his office, offering a practiced, professional smile. He extended his hand, but my father did not take it. Richard simply gave a curt nod, bypassing the pleasantries entirely. He stated his purpose with blunt efficiency. He needed a centerpiece for the new executive boardroom at the logistics headquarters. He specified that he did not want anything soft or sentimental. He wanted a piece that projected dominance. He wanted art that communicated the ruthless, cutthroat reality of modern commerce. I watched from above, my breathing slow and measured. It was a fascinating psychological display. My father viewed art exactly how he viewed people. They were merely tools meant to serve a function or project a specific image. The gallery owner gestured toward the main wall and began guiding them through the space. They walked past 3 large landscape pieces. Patricia paused to admire a muted watercolor, but Richard kept moving his leather dress shoes, clicking a sharp, rhythmic cadence against the concrete. He dismissed the softer works with a wave of his hand. He demanded to see the focal point of the collection. The owner led them around the central partition. They stepped into the main viewing area where Redacted hung under 3 precise spotlights. Richard stopped walking. His forward momentum halted so abruptly that Patricia nearly bumped into his shoulder. From my vantage point on the mezzanine, I watched his posture shift. The rigid, practiced authority melted away, replaced by genuine, unfiltered captivation. He stood rooted to the floor, staring at the sprawling canvas. The crimson and deep black oil paint caught the light, projecting a violent kinetic energy. The sgraffito technique, the heavy ridges and deep gouges, gave the painting a 3-dimensional presence. It looked like a wound laid bare. It looked like raw power. "That is the one," Richard said. His voice echoed slightly in the quiet room, stripped of its usual booming volume. "The piece commands the space. It is aggressive. It refuses to apologize. I want it delivered to my office by Friday." The gallery owner clasped his hands in front of his waist, offering a polite, apologetic smile. "I am thrilled the piece resonates with you, Mr. White," he said. "However, as I explained to your assistant on the phone, this specific canvas is strictly exhibition only. The artist works under a pseudonym and has explicitly requested that this piece remain part of a private collection. It is not for sale." Richard turned his head, his expression hardening. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and withdrew a slim leather checkbook. "Everyone has a price," he stated flatly. The tone was not a negotiation. It was an edict. "Tell the artist I will double the gallery listing price. If that is insufficient, I will triple it. Write the number down. I am not leaving without securing the transaction." I leaned slightly over the glass railing, my eyes fixed on the scene below. The irony was exquisite. My father, the man who told me a paintbrush was a tool for failures, was currently standing in a downtown gallery offering triple the market rate to purchase a painting I created. He was trying to buy the very thing he had mocked. But the irony ran much deeper than the transaction. He was attempting to purchase his own federal indictment. The gallery owner maintained his professional composure. "I assure you, sir, the restriction is not a negotiation tactic. The piece is legally held in a blind trust. I do not have the authority to sell it, regardless of the financial incentive." Richard let out a sharp breath of frustration. He snapped the checkbook shut, slipping it back into his jacket. He turned his attention back to the canvas, his jaw tight. If he could not buy it, he intended to understand what made it so untouchable. He stepped forward, crossing the invisible boundary that separated the viewer from the art. He stood mere inches from the painted surface. The spotlights illuminated the thick, aggressive texture of the base layer. He squinted, examining the deep scratches I had carved into the crimson oil paint. He was looking for the brush strokes. He was looking for the mechanics of the creation. Instead, he found the white paper beneath. I watched his eyes track the ridges. I knew exactly what segment of the canvas he was examining. It was the lower left quadrant where the sgraffito cuts were the deepest. My etching tool had scraped away the red pigment to reveal a cluster of micro-shredded documents locked in the archival paste. The silence in the gallery stretched, tightening like a piano wire. Richard leaned an inch closer. The ambient light caught the faint blue ink printed on the exposed paper fragments. I had mapped the offshore accounts meticulously. I knew the exact alphanumeric sequence he was reading. It was a routing number assigned to a Cayman Islands shell entity. Beneath that sequence, a distinct corporate watermark showed through the torn edges. It was a watermark exclusive to his own logistics empire, the very same internal documents his son Preston used to siphon the employee pension fund. From the mezzanine, I watched the physical transformation take hold. Richard's shoulders dropped. The rigid, confident spine seemed to hollow out. He froze, his eyes darting frantically across the canvas, tracing one scratch to the next. He found another routing number. He found a fractional dollar amount matching a recent hidden transfer. He found the defunct corporate name registered to my sister-in-law, Harper. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He was no longer looking at an abstract painting. He was staring at a forensic audit, weaponized as fine art. He was looking at undeniable proof of his company's darkest financial secrets exposed under gallery spotlights for the entire city to view. His right hand lifted from his side. The movement was slow, uncoordinated. His fingers reached up to his collar. His hand trembled, a fine, visible shaking that he could not suppress. He fumbled with the knot of his silk tie, pulling it loose as if the fabric was suddenly choking him. The air seemed to leave his lungs. He took a short, ragged breath. Richard White, a man who controlled thousands of employees and billions of dollars, was suffocating in plain sight. Patricia noticed the shift. She stepped up beside him, touching his elbow. "Richard," she whispered, her tone laced with confusion. "What is wrong with you? You look unwell." He did not answer her. His mind was racing, processing the impossible variables. He knew the internal ledgers were highly classified. He knew only a select few individuals possessed the security clearance required to access the pension fund data. He connected the dots, tracing the path from the encrypted servers to the gallery wall. He thought of the daughter he had marginalized, the daughter who balanced his books in silence, the daughter who painted in her spare time. He realized the pseudonym was a shield protecting my identity while I publicly displayed his ruin. The conflict breached the threshold from a minor family slight into a terrifying, major professional vulnerability. If a federal regulator walked into this gallery and understood the texture of that canvas, his entire empire would collapse before the end of the fiscal quarter. Richard grabbed Patricia's arm. His grip was tight, desperate. "We are leaving," he said, his voice hoarse. "But the boardroom," Patricia protested, stumbling slightly as he pulled her toward the exit. "We have not chosen a piece. We are leaving now," he snapped. He did not look back at the painting. He did not look up at the mezzanine. He dragged my mother toward the heavy glass doors, pushing through them with a frantic urgency that shattered his curated image of dominance. The doors swung shut behind them, cutting off the sound of the street traffic. I remained on the mezzanine, the cool glass railing grounding me. The first domino had fallen. The arrogant patriarch had discovered the trap, and his immediate reaction was raw, unadulterated panic. He would not go to the police. He could not claim the art was stolen property without admitting the fraudulent documents were authentic. He was cornered by his own secrets. I stepped back into the shadows of the loft. I knew exactly what would happen next. Richard would return to his mahogany office. He would pick up his phone and summon his son and his daughter-in-law. He would demand an explanation for the leaking ship. The psychological war had officially moved from the silent gallery into the very heart of his corporate fortress. I turned toward the stairs, ready to face the storm they were about to unleash. A heavy, custom-engraved crystal paperweight rested near the edge of the mahogany desk. It caught the late afternoon sunlight filtering through the executive office windows, casting sharp, prismatic fractures across the polished wood. The object was a solid block of flawless glass, etched with the logistics company logo. It sat perfectly still. It was the only thing in the room that possessed any stability. Richard White paced the length of his private office, his dress shoes grinding into the woven carpet. The air in the room carried the distinct metallic scent of raw panic, fighting a losing battle against expensive cologne. My mother, Patricia, sat frozen on a leather sofa near the door. Her posture was rigid, her hands clasped tightly around her designer purse. She stared straight ahead, unblinking. In the far corner of the room, sitting in a high-backed wing chair, was my Aunt Celine. She was my mother's half-sister, a brilliant African-American woman who had spent 30 years serving as a federal circuit judge before retiring. Celine wore a tailored plum suit and held a porcelain teacup resting it delicately on her knee. She was the only person in our extended family who ever saw my potential. She never liked Richard. She sat in the shadows of the office, observing the unfolding chaos with calculating silence. The heavy oak door swung open. My brother Preston walked in, followed closely by his wife, Harper. Preston wore a light gray suit that cost more than most of his warehouse employees earned in a month. He carried a leather portfolio projecting an unearned confidence. Harper walked beside him wearing a silk blouse and diamond stud earrings. Her lifestyle was a curated exhibition of wealth funded entirely by the invisible siphon bleeding my father's company dry. They expected a routine strategy meeting. They expected to discuss quarterly projections and country club memberships. Richard stopped pacing. He turned to face his son. He did not offer a greeting. He simply pointed a trembling finger at the empty chair across from his desk. "Sit down," Richard ordered. The tone left no room for hesitation. Preston lowered himself into the chair, exchanging a confused glance with Harper. Harper remained standing, resting a manicured hand on the back of Preston's seat. Richard placed his hands flat on the mahogany desk, leaning forward. He looked at Preston with a mixture of disgust and genuine terror. 10 minutes ago, I walked out of a downtown art gallery, Richard began. His voice was low, scraping the bottom of his throat. I went there to purchase a centerpiece for this building. Instead, I found a painting created by your sister. Preston let out a short, dismissive scoff. He relaxed his shoulders, leaning back in the chair. "Ceridwen is exhibiting her little hobbies now," he said. "I fail to see why that requires an emergency meeting. We all know she is desperate for attention." Richard picked up the crystal paperweight. His fingers gripped the heavy glass so tightly the joints turned white. He set it back down with a sharp, definitive thud. "The painting is not a hobby," Richard said. "The base layer of the canvas is constructed from shredded paper." I stepped close to examine the texture. I read the fragments. I read a routing number belonging to a Cayman Islands shell entity. I read a fractional transfer amount dated 3 weeks ago. I read a corporate holding name registered to your wife. The color drained from Preston's face in an instant. The confident posture collapsed. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. He stared at his father, his eyes wide and vacant. The portfolio slid from his lap, hitting the carpet with a dull slap. Harper removed her hand from the back of the chair. She took a half step backward, putting physical distance between herself and her husband. Her fingers found the diamond ring on her left hand, twisting the metal around her knuckle in a rapid, nervous motion. "That is impossible," Preston finally stammered, his voice cracked. "The internal servers are encrypted. Only a senior-level auditor has the security clearance to pull those logs." "You gave the senior-level auditor the keys to the kingdom," Richard countered. "You handed your sister the ledgers because you thought she was a quiet, obedient machine. You thought she was too busy balancing your legitimate books to notice the rot you built underneath them." Harper tried to intervene. She forced a high-pitched, brittle laugh. "This is ridiculous," she said. "Ceridwen is just an amateur. She is probably making things up to cause drama. She is unstable, Richard. You know how she gets. She is just throwing a tantrum because we skipped her little art show." From the corner of the room, the porcelain teacup clinked against its saucer. Everyone turned toward the sound. Aunt Celine leaned forward into the light. Her expression was neutral, her eyes sharp and assessing. She looked at Harper the way a scientist observes a flailing insect. "My niece is not throwing a tantrum," Harper Celine said. Her voice carried the unmistakable cadence of a federal courtroom. "Ceridwen holds an active CPA license. She is a certified fraud examiner. She has spent a decade quietly tracking corporate malfeasance. If she has integrated duplicate ledgers into a public art installation, she is not seeking attention. She is executing a meticulously crafted whistleblowing campaign." Preston's breathing grew shallow. He loosened his silk tie, pulling the fabric away from his neck. "We will sue her," he said. His tone was desperate, grasping at the familiar tools of wealth. "We will file an injunction. We will call the police and have her arrested for corporate espionage. She stole proprietary company property." Celine offered a slow, humorless smile. "You cannot call the police, Preston." "Why not?" Preston demanded. "Because of the rules of evidence," Celine explained. She interlaced her fingers, resting them in her lap. "If you file a police report or a civil injunction for stolen trade secrets, you must provide a factual basis for the claim. You must stand before a judge under penalty of perjury and declare that the documents hidden in that painting are the authentic financial records of this company." The room went dead silent. The bureaucratic reality of the situation settled over them like a weighted blanket. "If you claim the art is stolen property," Celine continued, "you legally admit the fraudulent ledgers belong to you. You confess to the embezzlement on the federal record. Kiradwen knows this. She designed a trap with no legal exit. She is holding you hostage in plain sight." Richard stared at his sister-in-law. The magnitude of my foresight finally calcified in his mind. He looked back at his son. The golden boy, the heir apparent, was nothing more than a liability. The daughter he had marginalized, the woman he had treated as a disposable asset, was currently holding the entire logistics empire in the palm of her hand. The family dynamic shifted fundamentally in that moment. The dismissive arrogance evaporated. They no longer viewed me as a quiet, invisible disappointment. They feared me. They realized they were entirely out of their depth against a woman who had spent years silently crunching their numbers, studying their habits, and documenting their weaknesses. I knew their vulnerabilities better than they knew themselves. Harper stopped twisting her ring. She looked toward the heavy oak door, calculating her own odds of survival. Preston buried his face in his hands, hiding his panic from his father. Patricia remained frozen on the sofa, unable to process the collapse of her social standing. Richard looked down at the heavy crystal paperweight on his desk. He understood that brute force and intimidation were the only languages he spoke fluently. He could not fight a ghost in a gallery. He needed to bring the fight to his territory. He needed to look me in the eye and crush my resolve using the sheer weight of his authority. He believed that underneath my tactical brilliance, I was still the 16-year-old girl desperate for his approval. He believed he could break me. Richard reached across the mahogany desk and pressed the silver intercom button. His assistant answered immediately. "Draft an irrevocable termination of trust contract," Richard instructed, his voice devoid of emotion. "Include a sweeping non-disclosure agreement. Have legal send it to my printer in 10 minutes. He released the button and looked back at Preston. His eyes were flat and cold. "I am going to summon your sister to this office," Richard said. "I am going to put a pen in her hand, and I am going to remind her who owns her future." Richard released his grip on the desk and stood tall, projecting a hollow imitation of his former power. He believed he could buy my silence with threats. He had no idea he was preparing to walk into a secondary snare, carefully placed precisely where he intended to step. The doors of the corporate elevator parted with a soft metallic chime. I stepped onto the executive floor, letting the thick, woven carpet absorb the sound of my low heels. The receptionist, sitting behind a curved marble desk, did not offer a greeting. She simply offered a tight nod and gestured toward the far end of the corridor. I had walked this exact pathway hundreds of times during my tenure. In the past, I carried heavy binders filled with reconciled accounts and tax projections. Today, my hands were empty. The air conditioning hummed through the vents, maintaining a sterile, chilling temperature designed to keep employees alert. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped into my father's private office. The space was a monument to his ego. Framed photographs of Richard shaking hands with state senators lined the walls. The air carried the distinct scent of lemon polish and expensive aged leather. Preston and Harper were no longer present. My father sat alone behind his sprawling mahogany desk. Richard did not invite me to sit. He did not ask about my day. He simply reached across the polished wood surface and slid a thick stack of legal paper toward the edge. He picked up the custom-engraved crystal paperweight, an award for logistics excellence, and placed it deliberately on top of the documents. The faceted glass caught the afternoon sunlight, projecting sharp prisms across the room. "Sign it," he commanded. His voice carried the familiar cadence of unquestioned authority. It was the identical tone he utilized to finalize corporate acquisitions and dismiss underperforming vice presidents. I stepped closer to the desk, looking down at the paperwork. The bold header indicated an irrevocable termination of trust. Beneath that lay a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement coupled with a draconian non-compete clause. Richard leaned back in his high-backed chair, steepling his fingers beneath his chin. "If you do not affix your signature to the bottom line of that document within the next 60 seconds, you will no longer possess a trust fund," he stated. His gaze was flat, cold, and unyielding. "I will freeze your assets before the banks open tomorrow morning. Furthermore, I will make a single phone call to the state licensing board and have your accounting credentials permanently revoked under allegations of corporate espionage. You will never audit another ledger in the state of Arkansas. I will ensure every firm in Bentonville considers you an untouchable liability." He paused, letting the heavy silence amplify his threats. "In exchange for my mercy," he continued, "you will march back to that downtown gallery, retrieve your little arts and crafts project, and incinerate it." Richard watched my face, waiting for the visceral collapse. He expected the familiar signs of submission he had cultivated in our family for decades. He anticipated trembling hands, a wavering voice, and the inevitable desperate apologies. He waited for me to break. For a fleeting fraction of a second, the old reflex twitched deep in my chest. It was the fixer's dilemma, the ingrained childhood habit of absorbing his anger and smoothing over the rough edges of our family dynamic. I had spent my entire adult life making his problems disappear. When Preston crashed his first sports car into a retaining wall, I was the one who quietly managed the insurance adjusters. When the company faced a turbulent fiscal quarter, I was the one who worked 80-hour weeks to restructure the debt. The urge to appease him to protect the family name was a deeply wired survival mechanism. Then my mind shifted back to the gallery. I remembered the cold condensation dripping down the stem of my champagne glass. I remembered standing alone in a stark white room while the people I protected boycotted my debut. That memory acted as a precise psychological circuit breaker. The lingering desire to fix his mess died instantly. The emotional tether connecting me to his approval snapped, leaving only a calm, calculating void. I did not flinch. I did not lower my gaze. I reached forward and slid the heavy crystal paperweight aside. I picked up the contract, holding the thick linen paper in my hands. I read the terms, clinically scanning the dense legal jargon with the practiced eye of a seasoned auditor. The clauses were labyrinthine, designed to trap the signer in a web of perpetual financial servitude. They demanded silence, obedience, and total surrender. I finished reading the final page, noting the specific notary lines prepared for immediate execution. I raised my left arm and checked my watch. It was a modest stainless steel timepiece, an accessory chosen for function rather than display. I lowered my wrist and returned my attention to the man behind the desk. "You misunderstand the economic leverage in this room, Richard," I said. My voice remained even and conversational, devoid of any defensive edge. "The trust fund you are threatening to revoke is irrelevant. I have not drawn a single cent from that account in 4 years. His eyes narrowed, a subtle tightening of the muscles around his temples. "I sell my canvases anonymously to private collectors in New York and London," I explained. "My art revenue surpassed my corporate salary a very long time ago. Your capital holds zero power over me. I am financially autonomous." I dropped the contract back onto the desk. The pages scattered slightly, sliding across the polished wood. "Furthermore," I continued, "if I comply with your demand and burn the canvas, I would be committing a federal offense. The painting contains exact duplicate copies of the shadow ledgers your son used to siphon the employee pension fund. Destroying it constitutes the destruction of evidence in an active corporate fraud scenario. I am a certified fraud examiner. I do not tamper with evidence. The blood drained from Richard's face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly gray. The vein pulsing near his temple slowed its erratic rhythm. His intimidation tactics shattered against a wall of quiet, unyielding logic. He had brought a blunt legal threat to a woman who navigated complex regulatory statutes for a living. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words materialized. The booming patriarch, the man who commanded boardrooms with a single glare, was reduced to absolute silence. He realized in that moment that he could not buy my compliance, and he could not bully my conscience. The power dynamic did not just shift, it inverted. I reached into the right pocket of my tailored blazer. I retrieved a single peppermint wrapped in clear, crinkling cellophane. I placed the small, round candy on the mahogany surface near the scattered legal documents. I pressed my index finger against the wrapper and pushed it forward. The candy slid smoothly across the wood, stopping an inch from his paralyzed right hand. "You look tense," I observed, my tone gentle and detached. "You should manage your blood pressure. The upcoming fiscal quarter is going to be exceptionally stressful for you." I turned away from the desk and walked toward the heavy oak doors. My footsteps remained steady, purposeful. I did not look back to gauge his reaction. I pulled the door open and stepped into the silent corridor, letting the latch click shut behind me. The confrontation solidified my boundary. The line was drawn in permanent ink. Richard's traditional weapons of fear and wealth were neutralized, leaving him defenseless in his own domain. But predators do not simply surrender when their primary hunting tactics fail. They adapt. If Richard could not break me in a boardroom, the family would seek another battlefield. They would resort to dirtier psychological warfare. Harper was already planning her countermeasure. If she could not attack me legally, she would target my sanity and my reputation. The conflict was about to spill out of the corporate suite and poison the social elite of Arkansas. The sun warmed the limestone terrace of the Pinnacle Hills Country Club, baking the moisture out of the morning air. Harper lounged in a wrought iron chair positioned under a wide canvas umbrella. The breeze carried the scent of manicured Bermuda grass and the faint chemical tang of chlorine from the Olympic pool below. She wore a woven silk sundress imported directly from Milan. The garment draped flawlessly across her shoulders, catching the light with every subtle movement. That fabric was purchased 3 days ago using a debit card linked to an offshore holding company. It was the identical company currently draining the retirement accounts of her father-in-law's warehouse foreman. Harper held her smartphone near her mouth, pressing a polished fingernail against the screen to record a voice note. Her tone dripped with a manufactured saccharine sweetness designed to mask the venom underneath. "I am just so worried about Caridwen," Harper murmured into the device, her voice fluttering with practiced concern. "We all are. You know how much pressure Richard puts on the staff. We think she is suffering a stress-induced break from reality. She has locked herself in that studio, playing the starving artist. It is heartbreaking to watch a brilliant mind unravel like that." She released her finger, sending the audio file to a curated group chat of local wives, charity organizers, and socialites. She set the phone face down and took a slow sip of her mimosa. Across the frosted glass table, her tennis partner nodded, offering a deep, sympathetic frown. Harper laughed a bright, brittle sound and dismissed my artwork as a desperate, frantic cry for help. The dramatic irony hung thick in the humid air, suffocating everyone who could not see it. She was loudly mocking my aesthetic while wearing the stolen capital I was currently painting into a federal indictment. She weaponized pity because it was the only currency she possessed. The social ecosystem of Bentonville is a tight, interwoven web of corporate alliances and generational wealth. In this specific zip code, gossip moves through the city faster than a severed artery bleeds. The narrative Harper planted took root and blossomed into social exile within 48 hours. I felt the atmospheric shift the moment I stepped out of my loft. I walked into my regular coffee shop near the town square on a Thursday morning. The establishment was usually a hub of morning greetings and brief professional exchanges. The barista, a young woman who routinely asked about my latest audits, handed me my black coffee without making eye contact. She focused intently on wiping a clean counter. Two women sitting near the front window abruptly stopped talking the moment the brass bell above the door chimed. They stared silently into their pastry plates until I picked up my cup and walked out. The freeze was subtle, smooth, and highly intentional. By Friday afternoon, the professional consequences materialized, transforming the Whisper campaign from a social annoyance into a calculated financial attack. I opened my laptop to find an email from the owner of a regional boutique chain. I had managed her complex tax strategy for 4 years, saving her thousands in deductions. The message was brief, patronizing, and cowardly. She terminated our contract effective immediately. She cited a sudden need to transition her accounts to a firm offering a more conventional, stable environment. She ended the email by stating she wished me the best in my personal journey toward mental wellness. A few hours later, my phone rang. It was a local gallery owner who had previously expressed interest in hosting a small showcase of my watercolor studies. He stumbled over his words, claiming a scheduling conflict had arisen. His tone was tight, nervous. He had heard the rumors. He believed the narrative that I was a liability, a woman cracking under the weight of her own ambitions. The social exile was engineered to suffocate me. Harper intended to isolate me from my clients, my peers, and my community. She wanted me to feel the crushing weight of public embarrassment. She expected me to react the way her social circle reacted to rumors. She anticipated a frantic, defensive social media post, a fiery public denial, or a tearful breakdown in the country club parking lot. She wanted me to scream my innocence, because a screaming woman is easily categorized as hysterical. I gave her absolute silence. I did not log on to the internet to defend my sanity. I did not drive to the boutique to confront my former client. I refused to participate in the melodrama she orchestrated. Instead, I treated the Whisper campaign the exact same way I treat a hostile corporate audit. I methodically documented every moving piece. Sitting at my kitchen island, I opened a fresh, encrypted spreadsheet. I logged the boutique owner's email. I documented the time and date of the canceled gallery contract. Aunt Celine, who remained entirely immune to Harper's Country Club influence, forwarded me the voice notes circulating among her retired judicial colleagues. I downloaded the audio files, saving them to a secure external hard drive. I traced the digital metadata, pinpointing the exact hour Harper initiated the smear campaign. I cataloged the rumors not as insults, but as behavioral data. Harper's strategy revealed her underlying panic. She could not attack the numbers etched into my canvas, so she chose to attack the accountant. It was a classic diversion tactic utilized by cornered executives. The louder she broadcasted her fake sympathy, the more she validated my threat. She was digging her own grave with a silver spoon, and I was merely recording the depth of the hole. I retreated to my art studio, leaving the noise of the city locked behind the heavy steel door. The space was a vast converted industrial loft. The high ceiling exposed raw brick and silver ductwork. The room offered no soft comforts, only rigid function. I walked over to the deep utility sink and picked up a heavy glass jar filled with clear liquid. I poured the solvent over a collection of stiff bristle brushes. The sharp, clean scent of turpentine filled the air. It burned slightly in the back of my throat, a harsh chemical reality. The smell was profoundly grounding. Turpentine is an unforgiving substance. Its sole purpose is to break down oil pigment, cutting through thick layers of paint to reveal the bare canvas underneath. It strips away illusions, leaving only the structural truth. I stood at the sink, working the solvent deep into the bristles, watching the murky crimson water swirl down the metal drain. My family lived in a world constructed entirely of appearances. They believed that controlling the narrative equated to controlling the truth. They thought a well-placed rumor could dismantle a decade of my meticulous forensic work. They relied on social standing because it was the only foundation they understood. I dried my hands on a rough cotton rag. In a reputational war, the loudest person is almost always lying. The quiet person holding the paper trail always wins. The social exile Harper engineered was not a punishment. It was a strategic gift. It cleared my calendar. It removed the mundane distractions of daily client meetings and forced pleasantries. It provided me with the uninterrupted isolation I required to finish the final phase of my project. I walked over to my drafting table and turned on the high-intensity examination lamp. Scattered across the illuminated surface were high-resolution macro photographs of the shredded documents I had embedded in my painting. I needed to dive deeper into the offshore accounts to map the final destination of the stolen pension funds. I needed to see exactly how many blue-collar lives Harper had jeopardized to fund her wardrobe. But Preston was growing desperate. The silence from my end was driving him to distraction. He was likely pacing his office, waiting for me to launch a counterattack. I needed to keep him occupied while I uncovered the deepest layers of the fraud. He needed a puzzle to solve a fake victory to soothe his bruised ego. I reached for a blank tax draft, formulating a deliberate, sloppy deduction error. It was time to leave a false trail for my brother to follow, giving him the illusion of control while I prepared the real execution. I adjusted the lighting in my studio, swapping the warm overhead bulbs for a harsh, clinical white illumination. The brightness eliminated shadows, leaving every corner of the workspace exposed. I needed clarity. I needed to navigate the final layers of the logistics firm data without distraction. But I also knew my brother. The silence from my end was a vacuum, and Preston despised a vacuum. He was pacing his office, waiting for a counterattack. He operated on a foundation of profound insecurity, masking itself as arrogance. Ever since we were children, he searched for shortcuts to diminish my achievements. When I won a state mathematics tournament in high school, he did not study harder. He simply told our parents the grading system favored female competitors to meet quotas. He required leverage to feel superior. I decided to hand him a fabricated weapon. I needed him looking in the wrong direction while I dismantled his reality. I sat at my workstation and opened my accounting software. I pulled up the preliminary draft of my personal state and federal tax returns. I navigated to the itemized deduction schedule for my independent art business. With a few deliberate keystrokes, I introduced a glaring, sloppy error. I inputted a flat $4,000 deduction categorized as a specialized software expenditure. I attached no supporting documentation, no vendor invoice, and no depreciation schedule. It was an amateur mistake. It was the kind of vulnerability a first-year auditor would flag within 10 seconds. I saved the file and transferred it to a partitioned sector of the corporate server. It was a folder designated for my personal human resources documents, but I knew Preston routinely monitored the access logs of my terminal. I logged out and opened a hidden network tracking protocol. 40 minutes later, a notification blinked on my secondary monitor. An IP address assigned to the executive suite pinged the partition. Preston downloaded the file. I pictured him sitting behind his expansive desk, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. He would spend the next several days poring over my previous returns, consulting outside counsel, and building a blackmail strategy around a phantom $4,000 trap. He thought he caught me committing tax fraud. He thought he finally possessed the leverage to force my compliance. While he wasted hours interrogating a dead end, my schedule was clear. I turned my attention to the primary monitors. Spread across the digital workspace were high-resolution macro photographs. I had taken these images of the shredded documents embedded in my painting before sealing them under the crimson oil. I zoomed in on a specific cluster of paper fragments. The pixels sharpened, revealing the faded blue ink of a routing number and a partial account sequence. I cross-referenced the digits with the encrypted master ledger copies I stored on an isolated hard drive. The numbers aligned perfectly. I began peeling back the digital layers, moving backward from the Cayman Islands shell entity, tracing the capital upstream to its original source. The logistics firm maintained a robust employee pension fund. It was a public relations tool for Richard White, a mechanism he used to secure loyalty from the personnel who loaded the freight trucks and managed the distribution warehouses. I thought of the individuals attached to those accounts. People like Thomas, a shift foreman who had worked on the loading docks for 28 years. Thomas had a wife with chronic health issues. He relied on that pension to secure their twilight years. He trusted the company to safeguard his future. As I traced the ledger entries, a terrifying pattern materialized on my screen. The funds were not just being skimmed from corporate profit margins. The revenue generated by the daily logistics contracts remained untouched, protecting Richard's quarterly reports and keeping the board of directors pacified. The theft was concentrated entirely within the employee retirement accounts. A series of complex algorithms executed automated microtransfers every Friday at midnight. The software diverted fractions of a percentage from thousands of individual pension portfolios. It was a digital bleed, slow and steady, designed to evade the parameters of standard annual audits. The fractions pooled into a secondary internal holding account. From there, the capital washed through a series of international wire transfers before settling in the offshore entity. I highlighted the final column on my spreadsheet and ran the aggregate sum. The calculation finalized. The number blinking back at me contained 7 digits. Millions. They had siphoned millions of dollars from the men and women who broke their backs to build the logistics empire. The air in the studio grew thin. A cold, sharp clarity settled deep in my chest. Until this moment, my motivation had been deeply personal. I was focused on the empty gallery, the lifetime of marginalization, the cruel dismissal of my talents. I was avenging the 16-year-old girl standing in the mahogany study holding a watercolor painting. I wanted to prove my intellectual superiority and force my family to recognize my value. The numbers on the screen eradicated that minor selfish objective. My family was not just cruel. They were parasitic. They fed on the vulnerable, trading the future security of their own workforce for designer sundresses, luxury vehicles, and country club memberships. If the market experienced a minor downturn, the pension fund would lack the necessary liquidity to cover its obligations. The fund would collapse. Hundreds of families would face financial ruin, while my relatives drank imported champagne. The moral imperative shifted instantly. I was no longer fighting for an apology. I was stepping up to dismantle a criminal enterprise. I pushed my chair away from the monitors and walked to the center of the studio. Resting on a heavy wooden easel was a fresh, blank canvas. It was taller and wider than the previous piece, a sprawling rectangular void waiting for a foundation. I walked to the steel filing cabinet and unlocked the bottom drawer. Inside rested the remaining duplicate copies of the shadow ledgers, along with a newly printed stack containing the automated pension fund transfer logs. I gathered the thick stacks of paper and carried them to the industrial microshredder positioned near the utility sink. I fed the pages into the machine. The steel blades whirred, tearing the complex algorithms, the routing numbers, and the stolen millions into thin, narrow ribbons. The machine worked tirelessly, reducing the parasitic greed of my family into a mound of raw material. I gathered the shredded evidence and dropped it into a wide mixing basin. I poured a thick, archival-grade binding medium over the paper. Taking a heavy wooden paddle, I stirred the mixture, working the paste into the fibers until it formed a dense, gray mortar. I carried the basin to the blank canvas. Using a broad steel palette knife, I began applying the mortar. I did not use the rapid slashing strokes of my previous work. This piece required a different emotional frequency. I applied the material with deliberate, calculated precision. I built sharp geometric ridges, creating a structured, undeniable texture. Every mound of paste contained the truth of the stolen pensions. Every ridge held the future of a warehouse worker. This companion piece would not be an abstract expression of personal pain. It would be a visual indictment of corporate theft. As I scraped the palette knife across the canvas, my mind returned to the offshore accounts. Preston was the mule moving the capital through the system. But the encryption parameters on those automated microtransfers were highly sophisticated. They required an understanding of international banking protocols that Preston did not possess. He lacked the attention to detail necessary to maintain such a complex laundering operation without triggering federal regulatory alarms. Someone else was maintaining the network, someone who operated in the shadows, perfectly insulated from the daily operations of the logistics firm. I set the palette knife down on a work table. My hands were coated in the gray, sticky mortar. I needed to return to the encrypted digital logs. I needed to break the final firewall surrounding the offshore holding company. Preston was busy chasing my fabricated tax error, leaving the back door of the corporate server completely unguarded. The path was clear to identify the true architect of the embezzlement. I walked back toward the glowing monitors, ready to expose the puppet master pulling the strings. I washed the thick gray mortar from my hands, letting the warm water carry the residue down the deep utility sink. I dried my fingers on a rough cotton towel and walked back to my glowing workstation. The studio remained perfectly quiet, saving the low hum of the dual server towers stationed beneath my desk. I sat in my ergonomic chair and checked the network tracking protocol. The digital trap I placed for my brother functioned exactly as intended. The system logs verified that Preston's terminal from the executive suite remained locked onto the decoy tax file. I pictured him sitting behind his expansive desk, surrounded by legal pads, scribbling frantic notes. He was dedicating all his intellectual resources to deciphering a fabricated $4,000 software deduction. He believed he was unearthing my ruin. By focusing his limited attention on a phantom vulnerability, he left the perimeter of the internal pension database unguarded. I launched the decryption software on the final layer of the offshore network. The program ran a sequence of complex algorithms designed to penetrate the firewalls, safeguarding the destination accounts. The progress bar crawled across the screen. I picked up my ceramic mug, taking a slow sip of tepid black coffee. I did not feel the familiar rush of adrenaline that usually accompanies an audit breakthrough. I only felt a cold, clinical patience. The screen flashed a pale green, indicating authorized entry. The raw data populated my secondary monitor. Thousands of rows of micro-transfers cascaded downward in a dense, unformatted spreadsheet. I highlighted the columns and ran a sorting macro, filtering the transactions by their final geographic destination. The money flowed through a sophisticated tri-level international maze. The funds originated in Bentonville, bounced to a clearinghouse in Cyprus, washed through a trust on the Isle of Man, and finally settled into a private holding account in the Cayman Islands. I isolated the Cayman holding entity. It was registered under a limited liability company incorporated 5 years ago. I pulled the corporate registry documents and expanded the PDF on my screen. I scrolled past the standard operational boilerplate down to the Articles of Incorporation. The registered agent listed on the primary line was a generic corporate proxy firm operating out of a post office box. This was a standard evasion tactic. I navigated to the secondary bylaws, searching for the beneficiary declarations. The true owner of the offshore accounts must be listed to satisfy international banking compliance protocols. I located the final page. The digital signature materialized on the glowing screen. I stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. The puzzle pieces realigning in my mind formed a picture I did not anticipate. The primary beneficiary was not Preston White. The signature belonged to a trust bearing the maiden name of my sister-in-law, Harper. I leaned back in my chair, studying the alphanumeric sequence. The revelation shifted the entire gravitational pull of my investigation. Preston possessed an excess of unearned arrogance, but he held the intellectual depth of a shallow puddle. He routinely struggled to calculate his own quarterly tax estimates, requiring my constant supervision to avoid penalties. Structuring a tri-level international money laundering operation demands a profound fluency in global finance and regulatory evasion. Preston simply lacked the architectural vision to build this network. He was merely the mule. He pushed the buttons on the internal servers because his executive security clearance granted him the access. Harper was the mastermind. I pulled up a separate background file verifying Harper's personal history. She grew up in an old money Southern family that lost their entire fortune during the real estate crash of 2008. She learned at a very young age that comfort is fragile and poverty acts as a silent, persistent predator. She married my brother not out of deep affection, but to secure a systemic safety net. She integrated herself into my father's empire, placing herself close to the vault. But Harper understood the ruthless metrics Richard utilized to govern his family. She knew that if Preston ever fell out of favor or produced a string of failed quarterly reports, Richard would cut them off without hesitation. She recognized the precarious nature of her country club existence. Harper decided to construct her own parachute. She weaponized her husband's administrative access. She guided his hand, convincing him to skim the warehouse pension fund. But she insulated herself from the risk with terrifying precision. I traced the liability structure embedded in the shell companies. It was a masterpiece of self-preservation. The legal framework guaranteed that if an external audit ever detected the missing capital, the digital trail would terminate at Preston's desk. He was the authorized user executing the internal transfers. The federal authorities would trace the theft directly to his terminal. If the Securities and Exchange Commission knocked on the door, Preston would face 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Harper would file for divorce, cite a total lack of knowledge regarding his criminal activities, and quietly retain sole control of the offshore millions. She built a system specifically designed to sacrifice her husband to save her wardrobe. A chilling respect settled deep in my chest, mingling with a profound disgust. My psychological chess match was no longer focused on my domineering father. Richard was a relic, relying on blunt force and transparent intimidation tactics. Preston was a useful idiot, easily manipulated by proximity. The true apex predator of the White family was my silent, venomous sister-in-law. Harper sat on the limestone terrace of the country club sipping mimosas and recording voice notes about my mental instability while actively orchestrating a multi-million-dollar heist. She believed she was the smartest person in Bentonville. She thought her firewall was impenetrable. She assumed the quiet accountant balancing the legitimate books would never look beneath the floorboards. I pressed the print command on my keyboard. The high-capacity laser printer in the corner of my studio whirs to life. Crisp sheets of archival paper slid into the output tray. They contained the incorporation documents, the beneficiary declarations, and the exact digital signatures linking Harper's maiden name to the stolen warehouse pensions. I walked over to the printer and gathered the warm pages. This specific data required a distinct presentation. I carried the stack of evidence to the industrial micro-shredder. The steel blades engaged, reducing Harper's flawless legal insulation into thin white ribbons. I retrieved my mixing basin and prepared a fresh batch of archival paste. I blended the paper fragments into the medium, creating a dense structural mortar. The substance was heavy-laden with the truth of her betrayal. I approached the large companion canvas resting on the heavy wooden easel. I utilized my steel palette knife to apply the mortar in sharp geometric lines. I mapped the exact flow of the laundered capital across the vast surface, building undeniable textured ridges. For this specific piece, crimson oil paint felt insufficient. The color red signifies anger and outward aggression. Harper operated in the shadows, motivated purely by unspoken, calculated greed. She required her own distinct palette. I walked to my supply cabinet and retrieved a heavy metal tube of deep, toxic emerald green pigment. The hue mimicked the color of old currency and stagnant water. I squeezed a thick ribbon of the paint onto my wooden palette. I added a few drops of linseed oil, mixing the pigment until it achieved a smooth, glossy consistency. Using a wide bristle brush, I coated the dried mortar. I dragged the emerald paint across the canvas, hiding the shredded evidence beneath a layer of pristine, flawless green. The surface looked wealthy, opulent, and perfectly serene. It was the exact visual representation of Harper's curated lifestyle. Tomorrow I would retrieve my etching tool and carve the sgraffito lines into the dried paint. I would scratch away the beautiful green surface to expose the systemic rot underneath. I would ensure the art narrated the exact mechanics of her survival strategy. I set my brush down and returned to the utility sink. The solvent stripped the emerald pigment from my skin, leaving a sharp, clean scent in the air. The parameters of the trap were expanding. I had Richard cornered by his own legal threats. I had Harper identified as the true architect. The family was running out of shadows to hide within. My phone vibrated on the drafting table. The screen illuminated the dark room with a stark white notification. It was a direct message from the gallery owner. The text was brief and urgent. Richard did not surrender after our confrontation in his executive office. He realized his contracts and intimidation tactics held zero leverage against a woman who controlled her own finances. Therefore, he retreated to his only remaining reliable weapon, raw capital. The message indicated that a high-end corporate art proxy operating out of New York just contacted the gallery. The proxy offered a staggering sum, intending to purchase my entire exhibition anonymously. Richard planned to buy the evidence, sweep it into a private incinerator, and force me into a wealthy silence. The next phase of this war required a definitive lesson in legal ownership and blind trusts. The tires of my sedan rolled smoothly over the damp asphalt of the downtown commercial district. I parked near the rear entrance of the exhibition space, purposely avoiding the Main Street visibility. The morning sky remained heavy, with dense gray clouds threatening an imminent downpour. I stepped out of the vehicle and pulled my wool coat tight against the biting chill. The heavy metal door of the building swung open before I could even reach for the brass handle. The gallery owner stood in the threshold looking entirely overwhelmed. His face appeared pale, and his breathing felt noticeably shallow. He ushered me inside, quickly locking the heavy deadbolt behind us. The vast room felt incredibly empty, yet suffocating at the exact same time. My massive canvases hung on the stark white walls, radiating their hidden financial truths. The owner pointed a trembling finger toward his small, glass-enclosed office situated in the back corner. He explained a man representing a private boutique acquisitions firm was currently waiting on line 1. This specific firm operated out of Manhattan, specializing in highly discreet purchases for ultra-high net worth clients. I knew immediately my father was the individual funding this request. Richard lacked the emotional nuance to surrender gracefully. He viewed every single problem as a simple mathematical equation, requiring a massive infusion of capital to reach absolute zero. I walked into the cramped workspace and stared directly at the glowing phone console. The speakerphone light blinked rhythmically, casting a sickly green hue across the cluttered desk surface. I pressed the illuminated button to connect the call. A smooth, deep baritone voice filled the small room. The man introduced himself as a senior partner at the prestigious brokerage. He spoke with the polished, confident cadence of someone entirely accustomed to purchasing multi-million-dollar penthouses and silencing inconvenient corporate scandals. He did not ask any preliminary questions. He merely presented a strict, unilateral decree. His client wished to acquire my entire collection immediately. The exact price he quoted was staggering. It equaled 3 times the original asking amount for every single piece hanging in the building. The offer included a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement mandating the absolute destruction of all preliminary sketches and digital records associated with the work. The proxy expected instant, eager compliance. He assumed the astronomical sum would easily dissolve my resistance and force a swift, obedient signature. He paused, waiting for my enthusiastic acceptance. I let the heavy silence stretch across the phone line. The prolonged quiet deeply unnerved him. A nervous, embarrassed cough echoed over the speakerphone, betraying his manufactured Wall Street confidence. He cleared his throat loudly and asked if I fully comprehended the magnitude of the financial proposal. I leaned against the desk, resting my hands on the cool glass surface. I informed the New York broker he directed his incredibly generous pitch to the wrong individual. I explained I no longer retained legal ownership of the artwork. The aggressive corporate maneuver Richard attempted was entirely predictable. I spent my entire adult career anticipating the predatory tactics of wealthy, desperate men. Therefore, 48 hours prior to this specific conversation, I executed a highly complex legal transfer. I moved the complete portfolio into an irrevocable, blind trust. This specific financial vehicle legally separated the original creator from the tangible asset, rendering my personal signature utterly useless in any potential sale. The proxy stuttered his smooth professional facade, cracking under the unexpected bureaucratic wall. He aggressively demanded to speak with the authorized trustee. I smiled and gestured toward the office doorway. Aunt Celine walked into the room carrying her signature structured leather briefcase. She wore a tailored dark navy suit, projecting absolute, undeniable authority. Her physical presence commanded immediate, total respect. Celine spent 3 decades serving as a federal district judge, adjudicating high-profile corporate malfeasance cases. She built her formidable reputation completely dismantling the exact type of arrogance currently radiating from the telephone speaker. She understood the intricate mechanisms powerful men utilized to evade consequence. Her mind operated like a steel trap, catching every minor inconsistency and exploiting every single legal vulnerability. She took a seat in the oversized leather chair opposite the desk and leaned toward the microphone. She introduced herself, citing her former official judicial title. The audible shift in the broker's breathing indicated he instantly recognized her formidable name. Celine did not raise her voice. She utilized a calm, devastating tone, dissecting the proxy with surgical precision. She informed him the trust possessed zero interest in liquidating its assets to an anonymous, cowardly buyer. She mocked the amateur nature of his drafted non-disclosure agreement, pointing out 3 distinct clauses openly violating federal suppression statutes. She explained that attempting to purchase potential criminal evidence for the explicit purpose of physical incineration constituted a blatant obstruction of justice. The broker attempted to interject, citing client privilege and standard acquisition protocols. Celine cut him off completely. She stated any further communication from his firm would result in an immediate, formal referral to the state attorney general. She warned him that acting as a paid intermediary for an active criminal conspiracy could permanently cost him his brokerage license and his personal freedom. The proxy coughed again, this time sounding genuinely terrified. He offered a hasty, fumbling apology and abruptly terminated the connection. The loud dial tone echoed in the small office, sealing the absolute failure of the transaction. The broker would undoubtedly call Richard immediately to deliver the deeply humiliating news. My father honestly believed his billions granted him supreme dominion over reality itself. He thought he could easily buy his way out of the impending federal indictment. This spectacular failure proved his vast wealth was entirely useless in a legal realm he did not personally control. The financial barricade I constructed with Celine remained totally impenetrable. We permanently sealed off his traditional escape route, trapping him inside the terrifying consequences of his own limitless greed. The pacing of our conflict accelerated dramatically. The invisible walls closing around the logistics firm grew incredibly tight. Richard and Harper lost their initial legal leverage. They lost their insidious social manipulation tactics. They lost their overwhelming purchasing power. The pressure cooker finally reached critical mass. When cornered predators completely exhaust their conventional weapons, they rapidly abandon logical strategy and resort to primal, desperate actions. I thanked Celine profusely and walked back out onto the main exhibition floor. The artwork remained legally safe under the protective umbrella of the trust, but the physical location suddenly felt incredibly vulnerable. The gallery possessed only basic security cameras and standard metal deadbolts. These simple measures were vastly insufficient against a family facing decades in a federal penitentiary. If they could not legally acquire the canvases, they would surely attempt to eliminate the threat through brute physical force. My mind raced wildly, anticipating the inevitable violent escalation. I needed to secure the premises before nightfall arrived. I pulled out my mobile phone, intending to hire an independent private security contractor. Before I could dial a number, the screen illuminated brightly with an incoming call from an unknown source. I answered cautiously. A gruff, unfamiliar voice spoke a single chilling sentence, indicating my personal art studio across town had just been violently breached. The war transitioned rapidly from boardrooms and bank accounts into a terrifying physical reality, leaving me completely astonished and exposed to a sudden, dangerous escalation. The engine of my vehicle roared loudly as I navigated the treacherous, wet streets heading toward the industrial district. Rain lashed heavily against the windshield, blurring the neon lights of passing storefronts. My heart hammered against my ribs, creating a frantic rhythm fueled by pure adrenaline. That anonymous phone call echoed relentlessly within my mind. An unknown entity had violently violated my private sanctuary. I gripped the leather steering wheel tightly, bracing myself for absolute devastation. Pulling into the gravel parking lot, I immediately noticed the splintered wooden frame of the main entrance. The heavy steel door hung awkwardly on broken metal hinges, swaying slightly in the violent wind. Shards of shattered glass littered the concrete pathway, reflecting the harsh yellow glow of a nearby street lamp. I stepped out of the sedan, ignoring the freezing downpour soaking my wool coat. The interior space looked entirely ransacked. Work tables were overturned, tins of chemical solvent lay spilled across the concrete floor, filling the ambient air with a suffocating toxic vapor. Several blank canvases had been brutally slashed, reduced to useless ribbons of shredded cotton. It was a chaotic display of primal rage. My father undoubtedly ordered this destruction. He dispatched hired thugs to physically eliminate the looming threat. Richard always relied on intimidation when his financial leverage failed. Growing up, he controlled the household through unpredictable outbursts, conditioning everyone to fear his temper. He expected me to collapse weeping over ruined artwork. But he miscalculated profoundly. He assumed I stored the actual physical evidence inside this unprotected warehouse. He did not realize I moved the genuine masterpieces to the fortified gallery vault many hours ago. Those thugs destroyed nothing except cheap decoys and empty wooden frames. His brute force tactic yielded zero tangible results. As I surveyed the ruined workspace, a dark silhouette appeared in the shattered doorway. A tall man wearing a damp gray trench coat stepped carefully over the scattered debris. He did not look like a hired criminal. He carried a thick manila folder, clutching it tightly against his chest. He asked for my legal name, his voice completely devoid of any recognizable emotion. I nodded slowly, confirming my true identity. The stranger walked forward, dropping the massive package onto my surviving drafting table. The heavy, definitive thud resonated loudly through the quiet, ruined loft. He stated I was officially served before quickly turning around and vanishing into the stormy night. I stared at the soaked envelope resting among the broken paintbrushes. My hands trembled slightly as I ripped the sealed paper flap open. Inside rested a giant stack of official judicial filings. The formal header indicated an emergency civil lawsuit originating from the highest state court. The listed plaintiff was the regional logistics firm. The named defendant was me. I scanned the densely worded paragraphs, searching for the core argument. Richard sought an immediate legal injunction to permanently freeze the upcoming art exhibition. He formally accused me of malicious corporate espionage. The comprehensive document claimed I illicitly accessed restricted company databases, stealing highly sensitive proprietary trade secrets. He demanded the absolute confiscation and subsequent physical destruction of all my created paintings, citing immense potential financial damage to his daily business operations. My wealthy family genuinely believed they finally won this exhausting war. They thought the slow, grinding machinery of the justice system would rapidly bleed my personal finances dry, suffocate my momentum using endless bureaucratic red tape, and force my ultimate surrender. They wrongly assumed dragging me into a prolonged legal battle would completely silence the impending public scandal. A slow, involuntary smile spread widely across my face. The sheer, arrogant stupidity of the maneuver was genuinely breathtaking. I grabbed the damp legal packet, rushing back to my vehicle, leaving the destroyed studio behind. I needed to show this extraordinary development to Aunt Celine immediately. I drove directly toward her sprawling colonial estate, situated in the affluent northern suburbs. Celine greeted me inside her grand marble foyer, wearing a flowing silk robe, holding a crystal glass of aged bourbon. She led me into her warm, mahogany-lined library, motioning toward a plush velvet armchair. I handed her the damp court documents without speaking a single word. She placed her reading glasses delicately on the bridge of her nose, beginning to meticulously study the printed text. Celine possessed a brilliant legal mind, honed over decades serving on the federal bench. She survived the vicious political maneuvering of the judicial circuit by anticipating the fatal mistakes of arrogant men. She knew exactly how corporate titans destroyed themselves through overconfidence. The quiet room felt incredibly electric as she read. She lowered the papers, a sharp, dangerous grin illuminating her experienced facial features. She looked directly at me, asking if I fully comprehended what my father just accidentally accomplished. I nodded, my own smile perfectly matching hers. By officially filing this specific lawsuit, Richard committed a fatal, unforced error. In his desperate, rushed attempt to halt the gallery opening, he legally claimed the shredded documents embedded within my artwork constituted proprietary corporate property. He explicitly stated those hidden numbers belonged exclusively to his successful company. This reckless accusation legally admitted the fraudulent shadow ledgers were absolutely authentic. He authenticated the exact evidence required to permanently destroy his empire. If the hidden ledgers were simply fake forged documents, he could never claim them as legitimate proprietary trade secrets. By aggressively seeking the injunction, he formally confessed to the existence of the massive embezzlement scheme on a binding, permanent federal record. He voluntarily walked right into the courtroom, handing the presiding judge a signed, written confession. The entire dynamic of our bitter conflict shifted instantly. We were no longer playing defense against his aggressive intimidation tactics. We now possessed the ultimate offensive weapon. My father foolishly constructed his own inescapable legal coffin, handing me the final heavy nails. This profound victory tasted incredibly sweet, washing away decades of harsh marginalization. For my entire life, Richard treated me like a useless, disappointing appendage to his grand legacy. He constantly praised Preston's mediocre achievements while actively burying my undeniable intellect. He built a towering fortress of wealth, assuming his money shielded him from basic accountability. Yet his own blinding hubris provided the exact mechanism for his spectacular downfall. I stood inside the opulent library, feeling a profound sense of vindicating clarity. The justice system he weaponized against me was now his executioner. We needed to immediately forward this disastrous injunction to the federal regulatory agencies. Celine walked briskly toward her large antique desk, preparing to draft the official notification letter. We finally possessed the absolute, undeniable proof necessary to trigger a massive criminal investigation. Suddenly, my mobile phone began vibrating intensely inside my damp coat pocket. The caller identification display showed a restricted international number. I answered cautiously, pressing the device against my ear. It was neither Richard nor Preston calling to gloat. The frantic voice belonged to an executive banker stationed deep within the Cayman Islands. I previously flagged the offshore accounts using my advanced forensic software, alerting me to any sudden massive movements of capital. He frantically informed me that the primary holding account directly linked to Harper's maiden name was currently undergoing a massive, unauthorized liquidation. Someone was attempting to rapidly withdraw every single stolen dollar, transferring the funds into an untraceable cryptocurrency exchange. The true mastermind finally realized the corporate ship was rapidly sinking, and she planned to take the entire illicit fortune with her, vanishing completely before the federal authorities ever arrived. She intended to leave the rest of the wealthy family behind to violently burn in the impending legal fire. I possessed exactly 5 minutes to trace the final destination of the massive wire transfer before the stolen pension capital disappeared into a dark global abyss, permanently leaving me absolutely astonished and terrified. The 5-minute window felt like a rapidly tightening invisible noose around my neck. I dropped the mobile phone onto the cluttered desk and lunged toward my secure computer terminal. My fingers hammered against the mechanical keyboard, quickly accessing the encrypted routing tables. Harper possessed cunning survival instincts, but she severely misunderstood the architectural foundation of decentralized digital ledgers. She assumed moving the stolen warehouse pension capital into an offshore cryptocurrency node guaranteed absolute anonymity. I opened a direct interface with the destination exchange server. Utilizing a specialized security protocol I drafted during my advanced forensic certification exams, I injected a localized compliance script directly into the pending transaction block. The complex command immediately triggered an automated federal anti-money laundering flag within the global network. The exchange algorithm instantly responded by freezing the receiving digital wallet. The system now required rigorous biometric identity verification to release the frozen illicit funds. Harper could never provide her real government identification without immediately confessing to the colossal theft. She was permanently locked outside her own sophisticated escape pod. I exhaled slowly, feeling the crushing physical pressure finally recede from my chest. The subsequent morning brought a strange, unsettling calm over the city. Pale yellow sunlight struggled to pierce the thick layer of stormy gray clouds lingering heavily above the industrial sector. My focus remained entirely dedicated to finishing the monumental canvas. However, the gallery owner possessed entirely different, aggressive priorities. Recognizing the profound historical significance of the impending legal explosion, he decided to rapidly accelerate the timeline. He anonymously contacted an influential acquaintance working for a highly respected national arts publication. Right before noon, the prominent journal published their weekly digital newsletter featuring a highly cryptic, devastating blind item. The widely circulated article described a powerful logistics dynasty based in Arkansas facing imminent total financial annihilation. The anonymous author detailed a brilliant whistleblowing accountant utilizing a forensic audit painted entirely on canvas to expose systemic corporate rot. The specific details regarding the warehouse operations and the offshore Cayman holding networks were unmistakably accurate. Anyone operating within the Bentonville elite circle instantly recognized the implicit subjects. Inside the sprawling white family estate, panic detonated with explosive, catastrophic force. Patricia sat in the opulent, glass-enclosed sunroom drinking her expensive imported morning tea. As Richard's second wife, Patricia, spent 3 grueling decades meticulously constructing an impenetrable social fortress. Being an incredibly intelligent African-American woman, marrying into a traditionally exclusionary Southern aristocracy, she navigated immense daily prejudice. She systematically conquered every prestigious charitable board and elite country club committee through sheer, relentless willpower. She curated a flawless public image designed specifically to project absolute invulnerability. Reading the devastating digital column on her screen, she watched her entire magnificent kingdom suddenly begin to disintegrate. The blinding realization that her hard-earned societal standing was currently evaporating into thin air caused her normal rhythmic breathing to fracture. She snapped her sleek silver laptop shut, producing a harsh, violent cracking sound that echoed loudly through the quiet, empty mansion. The wealthy, terrified family immediately abandoned their individual selfish survival schemes, forming a desperate, temporary coalition. Less than an hour after the destructive article circulated, a small fleet of dark luxury vehicles swarmed the wet gravel parking lot outside my secluded studio. The heavy steel door creaks open violently. They marched into the creative workspace looking completely unhinged. The pervasive, sharp scent of industrial turpentine and raw linseed oil assaulted their senses. I stood calmly near the center wooden easel, holding my sharp metal etching tool. Richard entered first, his usual commanding, terrifying posture, entirely ruined. His expensive tailored suit appeared deeply wrinkled, and his aging face looked incredibly hollow. Patricia followed closely behind him, her flawless, elegant composure replaced by a terrifying, rigid desperation. Preston stumbled through the doorway, sweating profusely, his eyes darting wildly around the disorganized room. Harper anchored the rear, remaining completely silent. She stood near the exposed brick wall, staring directly at me. Her dark eyes conveyed the profound, venomous realization that her international crypto transfer failed spectacularly, leaving her totally exposed. Richard stepped forward, attempting to project artificial authority, but his vocal cords visibly trembled. He proposed a staggering, monumental financial compromise. He offered a colossal, multi-million-dollar immediate cash wire transfer directly into my personal banking accounts. He frantically framed the massive illicit payment as an early, generous advance on my future inheritance. His terms were incredibly simple. He begged me to permanently recall the scheduled gallery exhibition and physically incinerate every single painted canvas. He promised absolute, luxurious financial independence in exchange for my permanent, obedient silence. Preston chimed in next, his prior insufferable arrogance completely replaced by pathetic, pure terror. He pleaded with me, mentioning fabricated fond memories of our shared youth, desperately trying to manufacture an emotional sibling bond that never truly existed. He whined loudly about his potential lengthy prison sentence, asking me to show irrational mercy toward his doomed future. Patricia simply stared at the concrete floor, unable to mask her profound, suffocating humiliation. I listened calmly to their chaotic chorus of endless begging. A decade ago, their combined intense attention would have completely crushed my fragile resolve. Today, I felt absolutely nothing except pure, crystalline clarity. I looked directly into my father's desperate eyes and politely explained the severe legal reality surrounding his monumental offer. I clearly pointed out that accepting his generous financial bribe instantly transformed me into a willing legal accessory to massive corporate embezzlement. Receiving stolen employee pension funds carries the exact same mandatory minimum federal prison sentence as committing the original initial theft. I watched the remaining color completely drain from their faces as they slowly absorbed this unalterable, terrifying truth. I calmly explained they were currently standing inside an active investigative crime scene. I kindly asked them to immediately vacate the private premises so I could finish painting their inevitable, highly public downfall. The dramatic intervention proved my long emotional evolution was finally complete. I was no longer their compliant, invisible, silent fixer. They retreated, slowly backing out of the large studio like broken, defeated ghosts. The heavy door clicked shut, leaving me entirely alone with the drying artwork. I picked up my palette knife, ready to resume scraping the toxic emerald pigment. Suddenly, a sharp, loud chime erupted from my secure workstation. I walked over and opened the encrypted legal portal Aunt Celine provided. The urgent message contained a highly classified internal memorandum leaked directly from the State Attorney General office. The dense document revealed a completely unforeseen, devastating systemic complication. The powerful federal magistrate assigned to review Richard's emergency injunction recognized Harper's maiden name hidden deep within the submitted corporate filings. That specific, relentless judge previously prosecuted Harper's father during the catastrophic real estate collapse many years ago. The bitter, unresolved past collided violently with the fragile present. Instead of merely freezing the controversial artwork, the furious magistrate immediately issued a massive, sweeping federal subpoena. However, the demanding summons did not target Richard or Preston. The official court order explicitly demanded Patricia appear for a grueling sworn legal deposition regarding her intimate knowledge of the familial offshore banking network. The proud matriarch who desperately prioritized her flawless public image was now legally forced onto the terrifying center stage under penalty of perjury. I stared at the glowing monitor, realizing the impending legal inferno just doubled in size, leaving the absolute survival of the entire corrupt family completely impossible to predict. The persistent vibration of the mobile device resting against the mahogany drafting table fractured the quiet atmosphere of the studio. Vivian glanced at the illuminated screen, observing a highly encrypted text message originating from an unregistered number. The sender identified herself simply as Harper. The brief communication demanded an immediate covert meeting at a neutral location far removed from the towering corporate headquarters and the sprawling family estate. The fragile antagonist alliance was officially fracturing. The terrifying federal subpoena demanding Patricia testify under oath had sent massive shockwaves through the corrupt foundation of the wealthy dynasty. It was incredibly predictable that the smartest predator inside that mansion would attempt to sever ties before the entire structure collapsed. Vivian agreed to the rendezvous, selecting a quiet, upscale coffee boutique located on the distant western edge of Bentonville. This specific establishment catered to anonymous corporate executives conducting discreet negotiations over imported roasted blends. Arriving 20 minutes early, Vivian chose a secluded corner booth shielded by large artificial tropical plants. She ordered a simple black tea and waited patiently, observing the steady rainfall washing over the expansive storefront windows. 10 minutes later, the heavy glass door opened, admitting the sister-in-law. Harper looked drastically different from the perfectly polished socialite who typically commanded the country club dining room. Her designer trench coat appeared hastily buttoned, and her usually immaculate dark hair hung slightly disheveled around her pale face. She scanned the dimly lit room with frantic, nervous energy before spotting the corner booth. Sliding into the leather seat opposite Vivian, she did not bother offering a traditional greeting. The sheer panic radiating from her posture was entirely palpable. Harper placed her hands firmly on the wooden table surface, attempting to project a facade of composed negotiation. However, her physical tells betrayed her immense internal terror. Her right thumb compulsively found the massive, brilliant-cut diamond wedding band sitting upon her left ring finger. She began twisting the heavy platinum jewelry, relentlessly scraping the metal against her skin. She spun the expensive stone around and around until the delicate knuckle turned entirely white from the severe, restricted circulation. The gesture communicated a profound, desperate anxiety. Taking a shallow, shaky breath, Harper launched into her prepared survival pitch. She framed her entire marriage to Preston as a tragic, suffocating mistake. She utilized the exact same sentimental family rhetoric she previously weaponized, deploying manufactured tears to manipulate the narrative. She claimed Preston was an abusive, controlling monster who forced her to remain silent while he ruthlessly looted the warehouse pension fund. Playing the ultimate victim, Harper offered a monumental trade. She promised to physically deliver Preston's private, heavily encrypted, external hard drives directly into the hands of the investigating authorities. These specific hidden digital devices contained the raw, unedited financial logs detailing every single illicit transfer he authorized. In exchange for this devastating evidence, she demanded Vivian utilize her growing influence with Aunt Celine and the federal prosecutors to grant her absolute, sweeping immunity. She wanted her maiden name permanently erased from all public statements and future indictments. Vivian sat perfectly still, listening to the intricate woven tapestry of desperate lies. She analyzed the flawless performance, admiring the sheer sociopathic audacity required to execute such a maneuver. Harper genuinely believed she could sacrifice her foolish husband to the federal justice system and walk away possessing millions in stolen capital. The response Vivian provided was chillingly objective, devoid of any emotional resonance. She reached into her coat pocket, retrieving her slim, mobile phone. She placed the metallic device flat onto the center of the wooden table, directly between their untouched beverages. A small red indicator light pulsed steadily on the digital screen, confirming an active audio recording application was currently capturing every single spoken syllable. Vivian calmly explained the nuances of the Arkansas State Legal Code regarding digital surveillance. She detailed the specific statute governing one-party consent laws, explicitly stating that a recorded conversation remains completely admissible in a federal courtroom as long as a single participating individual authorizes the audio capture. Since Vivian consented to the recording, Harper's entire desperate confession and subsequent offer to trade stolen evidence was now permanently documented. The color vanished completely from Harper's face, leaving her complexion resembling cold gray ash. She stopped twisting the diamond ring, her hands dropping limply into her lap. Leaning forward across the small table, Vivian dismantled the remaining fragile illusions protecting the sister-in-law. She revealed her complete, comprehensive knowledge regarding the offshore banking architecture. Vivian described the intricate Cayman Islands holding company, specifically citing the exact corporate registry documents bearing Harper's authentic digital signature. She narrated the terrifying sequence of events involving the failed international cryptocurrency transfer, explaining exactly how she personally deployed the localized compliance script to freeze the receiving digital wallet. Vivian made it incredibly clear she knew Preston lacked the intellectual capacity to build a tri-level international money laundering network. She pronounced Harper as the true absolute kingpin of the massive financial conspiracy. She detailed how Harper maliciously manipulated Preston's administrative access, using him as a blind, oblivious mule to funnel the working-class pensions into her private offshore sanctuary. The sheer weight of the unveiled truth crushed the remaining defiance out of the terrified woman sitting across the booth. Harper opened her mouth, attempting to formulate a cohesive legal defense, but no sound emerged from her throat. She was entirely paralyzed, realizing her flawless, impregnable escape plan was meticulously dismantled before she even sat down to order a beverage. Vivian retrieved her mobile phone, terminating the audio recording application with a single, gentle tap. She looked deeply into Harper's terrified eyes, delivering the final, devastating blow. She calmly informed the paralyzed woman that she was merely an artist, painting a portrait of systemic corporate greed. She possessed absolutely no authority to negotiate federal plea deals or grant sweeping judicial immunity. She was not a prosecuting attorney managing a complex criminal docket. Her only objective involved finishing the textured canvas waiting inside her private studio. Standing up from the leather booth, Vivian gathered her warm wool coat, leaving the untouched cup of black tea resting on the table. She advised her sister-in-law to hire the most aggressive criminal defense attorney available in the Southern District, because the impending legal storm would offer absolutely zero mercy. Vivian walked away, leaving Harper sitting completely alone, submerged in a profound, suffocating silence. Stepping back out onto the damp concrete sidewalk, Vivian felt a powerful, surging wave of pure vindication. The family was rapidly consuming itself from the inside out, just as she predicted. She unlocked the heavy door of her sedan, sliding into the driver's seat, ready to return to the protective sanctuary of her creative space. She inserted the metal key into the ignition cylinder, bringing the engine to life. Before she could shift the transmission into gear, the vehicle navigation screen flashed a bright crimson warning color. An incoming urgent audio call superseded the standard radio broadcast. The digital display indicated the caller was Aunt Celine. The retired federal judge never utilized the direct automotive cellular connection unless a situation involved immediate, catastrophic danger. Vivian pressed the acceptance icon, feeling a sudden chilling drop in her internal temperature. Celine's usually calm, authoritative voice sounded remarkably strained and breathless. The veteran jurist rapidly delivered a sequence of terrifying updates that completely altered the trajectory of the entire conflict. Richard did not spend the morning passively waiting for his wife to face the grueling federal deposition. Recognizing the conventional legal avenues were rapidly closing, he deployed his most dangerous, catastrophic weapon. The logistics firm he governed held several highly classified, lucrative freight contracts, managing sensitive materials for the National Defense Department. Utilizing these powerful federal connections, Richard deliberately manufactured a completely false narrative regarding the stolen pension capital. He officially contacted a corrupt liaison operating within the Central Intelligence Apparatus, claiming the missing funds were actually utilized to secretly finance a sophisticated foreign espionage ring. Celine explained Richard officially named Vivian as the primary operative facilitating the fake international treason. He brilliantly weaponized the exact offshore Cayman accounts and cryptocurrency wallets she just investigated, twisting the digital forensic trail to make her appear like a hostile foreign agent. He submitted an emergency classified affidavit claiming the upcoming art exhibition actually contained dangerous coded visual data designed to transmit sensitive military logistics to overseas enemies. The retired judge delivered the final, terrifying consequence of this massive, unpredictable lie. A heavily armed tactical strike team dispatched by the Homeland Security Division was currently en route to raid the downtown gallery. They possessed absolute federal authority to indefinitely seize the artwork, detain any individuals present, and transport Vivian to a classified, undisclosed holding facility under the severe provisions of the National Espionage Act. The ordinary corporate embezzlement scandal instantly transformed into a terrifying matter of high-level state security. Vivian stared through the rain-slicked windshield, her mind racing frantically to comprehend the immense scale of this unprecedented escalation. Her father successfully bypassed the standard civil courts and the regional prosecutors, dragging the absolute heaviest machinery of the federal government into their private family war. She needed to reach the gallery and extract the most critical canvases before the tactical units established a hard physical perimeter. The slow, steady mechanism of justice vanished entirely, replaced by a desperate, violent race against time, leaving the young artist astonishingly outmaneuvered and facing the terrifying prospect of permanent, unconstitutional detainment. The tires of the sedan sliced violently through the standing water flooding the downtown avenues. Vivian gripped the steering wheel with absolute white-knuckled intensity, navigating the treacherous rain-slicked intersections. The fabricated espionage accusation represented a catastrophic, unimaginable escalation. Her father had successfully weaponized the national defense apparatus, transforming a localized corporate embezzlement scandal into a terrifying high-stakes federal crisis. She needed to reach the exhibition space before the armed tactical units established a hard physical perimeter and confiscated the evidence forever. Pulling into the narrow, shadowy alleyway behind the brick gallery building, she quickly killed the engine. 4 massive black sport utility vehicles, featuring heavily tinted windows, were already parked closely near the rear loading dock. She braced herself, anticipating the shouting voices of aggressive military personnel. Instead, the heavy steel service door swung open, revealing the calm, reassuring presence of Aunt Celine. The retired federal judge looked entirely unbothered by the torrential downpour, her rigid posture radiating absolute, undeniable authority. Beside her stood a slender, middle-aged man wearing a meticulously tailored gray suit, holding a reinforced aluminum briefcase. Celine gestured for Vivian to enter the dry building quickly, explaining the miraculous jurisdictional maneuver she just executed. The precise moment the malicious intelligence report registered within the national database, Celine utilized her extensive judicial contacts to aggressively flag the fraudulent filing. She immediately contacted the regional directors at the Securities and Exchange Commission, leveraging Vivian's previously established protected status. By proving the core dispute involved massive domestic corporate fraud rather than absurd international treason, the financial regulators invoked their absolute primary jurisdiction. This swift, bureaucratic intervention immediately superseded the Homeland Security mandate, permanently grounding the tactical raid. The terrifying military threat dissolved seamlessly into a highly structured, rigorous regulatory intervention. The slender man standing beside Celine introduced himself as Julian Thorne. He operated as an elite independent forensic appraiser who exclusively consulted for the highest levels of the federal government. Julian possessed a highly unique, impressive background, spending an entire decade analyzing complex financial crimes for the Treasury Department, before transitioning into the specialized, lucrative field of high-value art authentication. He intimately understood exactly how sophisticated criminals laundered illicit capital through prestigious auction houses and private elite collections. His sudden presence indicated the bitter familial conflict had permanently shifted from a defensive civil battle into a devastating, unstoppable federal offensive. They moved silently through the deserted exhibition floor, walking directly into the climate-controlled primary vault located deep within the center of the structure. The heavy reinforced titanium door sealed shut behind them, instantly eliminating the loud ambient sounds of the thunderstorm raging outside. The secure interior space felt remarkably like a pristine clinical laboratory. Brilliant white halogen lights illuminated the massive emerald canvas, resting securely upon a sturdy steel easel. The thick, textured painted surface gleamed beautifully under the intense artificial illumination, perfectly hiding the explosive financial secrets buried beneath its expensive exterior. Julian approached the masterpiece, opening his metallic briefcase with a sharp, distinctive click. He retrieved a specialized jeweler's loupe, which was a powerful cylindrical magnification tool designed to closely inspect microscopic details. He approached the intricate painting with practiced, measured reverence. He did not rush the delicate procedure. He spent several long, uninterrupted minutes adjusting the ambient lighting panels, ensuring random, harsh shadows would not obscure the fragile underlying paper architecture. Finally, he leaned forward, pressing the small optical lens firmly against his right eye. The suffocating silence inside the thick, concrete room was absolute, magnifying every minor shifting sound. Julian slowly dragged his highly focused gaze across the jagged, scraped valleys where Vivian had intentionally exposed the white, shredded fragments. As he carefully reached the lower right quadrant, containing the specific numeric offshore routing codes, a sharp, audible intake of breath escaped his lips. The sudden, surprising sound echoed clearly throughout the sterile, isolated vault, signaling a monumental, undeniable discovery. Stepping backward, Julian carefully removed the optical magnification device from his face. He looked directly at the retired judge, his stern expression conveying profound, genuine, professional astonishment. He stated definitively that the embedded, shredded documents were undeniably authentic. Under the intense microscopic magnification, he easily identified the highly proprietary corporate microprinting and the incredibly specific, complex anti-counterfeiting watermarks utilized by the exact Cayman Island shell banks Harper had previously employed. He recognized the sequential digital hashes, completely confirming the massive, illicit capital transfers. The meticulous, beautiful artwork was not merely a symbolic, abstract representation of familial greed. It was a verifiable, comprehensive, physical ledger detailing monumental federal crimes. This formal, expert authentication instantly triggered a catastrophic legal collapse for the opposing, corrupted side. To secure his desperate emergency civil injunction, Richard had aggressively claimed Vivian illegally stole proprietary corporate trade secrets. However, modern federal whistleblower statutes explicitly protect brave individuals who duplicate and expose internal confidential documentation to reveal deeply illegal activities. Since Julian officially verified the canvas contained incontrovertible physical evidence of a massive federal felony, the controversial artwork immediately gained absolute, ironclad legal immunity. The malicious, suffocating civil lawsuit instantly disintegrated into useless dust. The arrogant patriarch had unknowingly handed the investigating federal authorities a perfectly packaged, fully authenticated roadmap leading directly toward his own inevitable criminal conviction. The profound realization settled heavily into the quiet, secure room. The slow, methodical appraisal process had built a suffocating, terrifying logical tension that completely inverted the fundamental power dynamic of the entire war. The wealthy, powerful family could no longer utilize expensive, aggressive corporate lawyers to suppress the impending exhibition. The painted collection was now officially classified as protected, untouchable federal evidence. The upcoming highly anticipated public gallery opening would essentially serve as a massive, visually stunning grand jury presentation broadcast directly to the entire elite community. The trap had snapped entirely shut, grounding the magnificent climax completely in unshakable modern American legal reality. Vivian felt a profound, overwhelming wave of pure, vindicating relief wash over her exhausted body. The immense, heavy boulder she pushed up the impossible mountain for months finally reached the absolute peak. Just as Julian opened a leather portfolio preparing to draft his official preliminary sworn affidavit, his secure, government-issued mobile device vibrated violently against the steel table. He answered the sudden, urgent call, listening intensely for nearly 2 full minutes without speaking a single word. His focused, clinical facial expression rapidly shifted, transitioning from satisfied professional accomplishment into genuine, terrified alarm. He ended the encrypted connection, dropping the device back onto the flat surface. The seasoned federal agent looked at the 2 brilliant women standing across the cold room and explained a terrifying, completely unprecedented new development. While they were safely secured inside the underground bunker authenticating the crucial evidence, a catastrophic, monumental financial maneuver occurred within the regional banking sector. Patricia, realizing the inherited logistics empire was entirely doomed, had ruthlessly initiated her own independent, catastrophic exit strategy. She utilized her incredibly powerful sister, who served as a senior executive director on the Regional Federal Reserve Oversight Committee, to quietly execute an absolute emergency regulatory freeze on every single domestic account connected to the wealthy dynasty. However, the brilliant, scorned stepmother did not stop her aggressive, offensive campaign there. Exploiting a highly classified hidden spousal indemnity clause buried deep within her original marital contract, Patricia successfully permanently severed her massive personal assets from the collapsing, corrupted corporate entity. Utilizing her newly liberated massive fortune, she subsequently purchased the underlying commercial mortgage attached to the exact downtown commercial building currently housing the art gallery. The wealthy, sophisticated matriarch now legally, completely owned the massive physical structure surrounding them. As Julian finished explaining the horrifying reality of the unexpected real estate acquisition, the bright halogen lights inside the secure vault suddenly flickered erratically and completely died. The transition plunged the windowless concrete room into absolute, suffocating, pitch-black darkness. A second later, the heavy electronic deadbolt mechanism on the primary titanium door clicked ominously, engaging a permanent lockdown sequence controlled entirely from an external remote server. The ultimate final trap was no longer merely financial or strictly legal. It was intensely, terrifyingly physical. The trio remained trapped entirely in the freezing dark, breathing rapidly, depleting recycled air, as the true, ultimate mastermind of the family finally revealed her astonishing, lethal capabilities. The slow, careful machinery of justice was suddenly replaced by a desperate, primal fight for immediate physical survival against a woman who refused to lose her immaculate social kingdom. The claustrophobic pitch darkness inside that concrete subterranean vault merely represented a temporary inconvenience rather than an actual permanent tomb. Julian expertly dismantled the electronic deadbolt, utilizing a specialized manual hydraulic bypass mechanism embedded secretly within his government-issued briefcase. That terrifying ordeal felt like distant, ancient history now. The narrative timeline aggressively snaps forward, arriving at the glorious present moment. Tonight is the magnificent pinnacle of my lengthy, orchestrated campaign. The architectural marvel hums with palpable electric energy. Bentonville High Society congregates beneath soaring, illuminated glass ceilings. Impeccably dressed waiters circulate smoothly, carrying gleaming silver trays loaded with premium crystal champagne flutes. A highly acclaimed classical string quartet plays a sophisticated, intricate Vivaldi arrangement, filling the vast, cavernous exhibition hall with elegant, sweeping melodies. The ambient atmosphere radiates absolute, untouchable luxury. The exclusive guest list includes the most powerful political figures in the state, the regional banking executives, and the elite socialites who traditionally dictate cultural trends. They sip rare vintages and discuss upcoming summer vacations, completely oblivious to the impending catastrophic earthquake. My father stands proudly near the primary sweeping grand staircase, projecting his customary artificial dominance. He spent 4 grueling decades ruthlessly transforming a modest regional trucking outfit into a monstrous global logistics behemoth. His entire corporate strategy relied upon crushing vulnerable competitors and systematically exploiting dedicated working-class employees. He genuinely believes tonight celebrates his ultimate triumph over my stubborn artistic rebellion. He assumes the federal investigation remains stalled, and his expensive lawyers successfully buried the damning evidence forever. Holding a glass of aged bourbon, he laughs loudly at a joke told by a prominent local politician, unaware his majestic inherited legacy currently teeters upon the jagged edge of absolute, irreversible oblivion. I stand near the control podium, my heart beating with a steady, rhythmic calmness. The nervous anxiety that plagued my early investigative efforts has vanished, replaced by a cold, clinical certainty. I spent countless sleepless nights staring at encrypted spreadsheets, deciphering the complex language of systemic fraud. Tonight, I translate that raw data into a universal visual medium that nobody can possibly ignore or deny. The designated hour finally arrives, signaling the highly anticipated main event. The heavy crimson velvet drape concealing the massive centerpiece installation gracefully drops toward the polished hardwood floorboards. A collective curious murmur ripples rapidly through the gathered elite assembly. Unlike my previous heavily textured physical paintings, this specific focal piece, titled Reconciliation, appears initially as a stark, pristine, blank white surface. Confusion momentarily clouds the faces of the wealthy patrons. Several influential critics whisper quietly among themselves, questioning the simplistic aesthetic choice. Then, a hidden high-definition laser projector activates silently from the shadowed upper mezzanine balcony. It casts a brilliant, blinding beam directly onto the empty fabric, initiating a breathtaking interactive digital performance. The precise technological execution catches everyone entirely off guard. An intricate, beautifully animated color-coded web begins weaving aggressively across the illuminated canvas. The stunning visual graphics are simultaneously horrific and mathematically flawless. Glowing neon crimson lines trace thousands of illicit wire transfers, originating directly from the centralized warehouse worker pension fund. These bright digital rivers flow inevitably outward, mapping the complex journey of every single stolen dollar. The illuminated pathways navigate through a confusing labyrinth of dummy corporations, shell entities, and fake charitable trusts, before finally converging upon a massive, central, flashing node. Bold typography materializes on the large screen, revealing the secret offshore accounts registered explicitly under Harper's maiden name. The projection transitions dynamically. The red lines, representing stolen capital, shift into vibrant green pathways, illustrating the legitimate freight revenue streams. The sharp contrast highlights the parasitic nature of the embezzlement scheme. The green lines starve and wither, while the crimson lines swell with illicit prosperity. The visual metaphor is devastatingly clear. The captive audience watches the financial lifeblood of the corporate workforce being siphoned away to fund extravagant personal luxuries. The irrefutable forensic audit I painstakingly constructed over several exhausting months is now broadcasting live in spectacular, glowing detail. Every transaction timestamp, every hidden routing number, and every forged signature is displayed for the entire region to witness. My brother watches the undeniable graphical evidence materialize, his mouth falling completely open. Preston spent his entire privileged existence safely shielded by immense generational wealth, remaining comfortably blind to any complex interpersonal manipulation. He genuinely trusted his beautiful, cunning wife. Harper grew up experiencing severe, crushing poverty in rural mountainous Appalachia. That harsh, traumatic upbringing forged a ruthless, sociopathic survival instinct inside her soul, eventually compelling her to orchestrate this colossal financial betrayal to ensure she never experienced economic insecurity again. Preston stares at the glowing name of his beloved spouse illuminated on the massive screen. His reality fractures in an instant. He remembers every romantic vacation, every whispered promise, every shared secret. He realizes his marriage was a meticulously constructed transactional mirage. Harper never loved him. She only valued the unrestricted access he provided to the corporate treasury. The profound psychological trauma of that realization visibly breaks his spirit. The expensive imported scotch slips slowly from his trembling fingers. The heavy crystal tumbler shatters violently against the pristine floor, splashing amber liquid everywhere. That loud, piercing crash triggers a catastrophic chain reaction of total devastation. The sudden, deafening silence from the hired musicians is absolutely terrifying. The professional string quartet stops playing mid-measure, their wooden bows freezing, awkwardly suspended in midair. The cheerful, festive clinking of expensive glassware ceases entirely. The joyful, ambient chatter evaporates instantly, replaced by a suffocating, heavy, dreadful tension. 40 long years of meticulously curated, prestigious family reputation evaporates within 30 devastating seconds. The philanthropic facade, the community awards, the endless magazine profiles, all burn away under the harsh, revealing light of undeniable truth. Richard remains completely paralyzed, incapable of processing the spectacular public annihilation of his supposedly untouchable empire. His strong facial muscles slacken, his imposing posture crumbling under the crushing weight of public exposure. The invincible titan of Southern commerce suddenly looks incredibly old and fragile. Harper does not hesitate for a single moment. Recognizing her flawless, brilliant scheme is permanently ruined, she spins around and sprints frantically toward the rear emergency exit. Her designer heels click rapidly against the smooth marble tiles, echoing loudly throughout the stunned, silent gallery. Her frantic departure acts as a definitive, silent confession to everyone present. Nobody attempts to block her cowardly escape. I do not scream angrily or demand emotional apologies from my broken relatives. I simply stand calmly beside the glowing projection, maintaining an entirely neutral, composed, physical expression. I gently step toward the small microphone positioned near the wooden podium, addressing the frozen crowd. I clearly explain the profound, undeniable artistic merit of absolute, total transparency. The poetic justice feels spectacularly complete because I utilize their own proprietary numerical data to paint their undeniable destruction. I permanently etched the ugly truth directly into the elite community consciousness, achieving a flawless victory rooted entirely in factual reality. The satisfying astonishment gripping the crowded room is abruptly shattered by a jarring mechanical sound. The massive bronze main entrance doors of the museum slam shut simultaneously, locking with a loud, definitive, heavy metallic clank. The wealthy patrons turn around in panicked, utter confusion as their exclusive sanctuary transforms into a gilded cage. Dozens of stern men and women wearing tactical Navy windbreakers emblazoned with bold yellow federal law enforcement insignia step out from the surrounding perimeter shadows. The luxurious venue is completely surrounded and sealed. The slow, methodical machinery of justice has finally arrived to collect its massive overdue debt. However, the true shocking surprise arrives from the front barricade. Patricia calmly walks through the secured line of armed agents, flanked by 2 senior Justice Department prosecutors. Her elegant posture exudes absolute triumph. She confidently holds a signed, unredacted blanket immunity agreement. The brilliant, scorned stepmother successfully traded her corrupted family to the government in exchange for keeping the recently acquired commercial real estate and a massive percentage of the legitimate corporate assets. As marshals advance forcefully to place Richard and Preston into heavy iron handcuffs, Patricia locks eyes with me, offering a chilling, predatory, victorious smile. The embezzlement scandal is definitively solved, but a terrifying, entirely new apex predator now controls the regional economic monopoly, completely unburdened by familial loyalty or any legal restraint. The ultimate battle for power has just fundamentally evolved, leaving the surviving players facing an unprecedented, dangerous landscape. The blinding morning sunlight illuminated the shattered remnants of a massive corporate dynasty. Federal investigators descended upon the sprawling logistics headquarters resembling a swarm of relentless, coordinated locusts. Heavily armed agents wearing dark navy windbreakers confiscated countless encrypted server racks from the centralized data processing center. Richard stood completely frozen beside his towering corner office windows. He watched a young forensic accountant carefully place his heavy crystal paperweight into a standard brown cardboard evidence box. That specific decorative object had served as a terrifying symbol of his absolute, crushing authority for nearly 4 decades. Now the expensive glass ornament simply represented another tagged physical item destined for a sterile government storage locker. The arrogant patriarch originally built this monumental transportation empire, utilizing sheer, ruthless determination. He sacrificed every single meaningful personal relationship to accumulate astronomical societal influence. Today, that entire sprawling kingdom evaporated instantly. He would soon vacate the opulent gated mansion, permanently relocating into a dreary, modest apartment complex situated near the noisy industrial sector. His magnificent, carefully curated legacy was permanently eradicated, transformed into a humiliating cautionary tale discussed within regional business schools. Across the bustling city, the terrifying legal machinery crushed the younger generation with equal, merciless efficiency. Preston and his cunning spouse faced devastating multiple-count federal indictments. The sister-in-law experienced the absolute worst possible nightmare imaginable. When the financial regulatory authorities corroborated the brilliant digital presentation from the gallery, they immediately executed emergency asset forfeiture protocols. Every single hidden offshore bank account holding the stolen employee retirement capital was permanently frozen. Harper grew up enduring severe, crushing poverty, hidden deep within the forgotten, rugged Appalachian Mountains. She meticulously orchestrated this massive criminal conspiracy, specifically to ensure she never tasted that bitter, terrible deprivation again. Now, sitting inside a cold municipal police processing room, she learned her immense stolen fortune remained entirely inaccessible. Because the government seized her illicit international funds, she could not afford an expensive, aggressive private defense attorney. The proud, manipulative socialite was officially assigned an exhausted, overworked public defender who barely glanced at her thick case file. She nervously twisted her bare left ring finger, realizing Preston had already pawned the heavy platinum diamond wedding band merely to cover his own preliminary, exorbitant bail expenses. Her flawless, sophisticated world collapsed into a chaotic, terrifying abyss. The surrounding affluent community obsessed over the spectacular, dramatic downfall. Prominent society columns published endless, frantic speculation regarding the ultimate emotional cost of such profound familial destruction. People frequently questioned if the severe collateral damage truly justified the relentless pursuit of absolute justice. The wealthy neighborhood elite whispered quietly that the young artist destroyed her own bloodline merely to satisfy a petty, lingering vendetta. They fundamentally misunderstood the true, hidden, sophisticated architecture of her magnificent master plan. The stunning public gallery projection merely served as the visible, dramatic execution. The actual devastating killing blow occurred several months prior, operating entirely under the absolute veil of total secrecy. Long before the vibrant emerald pigment ever touched the primary canvas, the diligent investigator executed a brilliant strategic maneuver rooted entirely in modern American legal reality. She meticulously compiled the decrypted forensic data detailing the colossal warehouse pension fraud. Then, she formally submitted an exhaustive, anonymous digital dossier directly to the National Securities Oversight Commission. Federal financial regulations explicitly incentivize brave civilian individuals who uncover monumental corporate corruption. By providing undeniable, verified proof leading to a successful federal prosecution, the law legally entitles the courageous informant to receive a staggering financial bounty. The established legislative framework guaranteed the whistleblower anywhere between 10 and 30% of the total recovered illicit capital. The investigating authorities ultimately seized hundreds of millions from the complicated offshore Cayman network. When the bureaucratic administrative dust finally settled, the government would issue a monumental certified Treasury disbursement directly into her private banking accounts. This astonishing legal mechanism generated a spectacular, unforeseen outcome, perfectly aligned with the ruthless logic of American society. By choosing to protect the vulnerable blue-collar warehouse workers and expose the systemic theft, she miraculously became legitimately, astronomically wealthy. Her newly acquired, pristine fortune completely eclipsed the tainted, corrupted net worth her disgraced father had spent his entire existence accumulating. She completely conquered the treacherous capitalist hierarchy without ever compromising her stringent personal moral obligations. The immense, surprising payoff left the observing regional aristocracy utterly astonished and completely defeated. The spectacular conclusion provided absolute, profound vindication. The narrative transitions away from the chaotic, noisy public spectacle, returning to the profound, peaceful silence of the secluded creative studio. The heavy steel door clicked open, admitting Aunt Celine. The brilliant African-American retired federal judge navigated the cluttered workspace carrying 2 steaming porcelain cups of premium imported coffee. Celine had consistently functioned as the true supportive family the young woman always fundamentally deserved. She possessed a deep, comprehensive understanding of complex societal power dynamics, having spent her own prestigious career dismantling systemic discrimination within the rigid Southern judicial system. Celine handed over the warm beverage, offering a gentle, approving smile. They discussed the impending final corporate liquidation, confirming the dedicated logistics employees would officially receive their stolen retirement savings fully restored with compensatory interest. The monumental ethical debt was finally satisfied. However, the wise older woman also delivered a crucial, vital piece of lingering strategic intelligence. Patricia, the cunning stepmother, who recently secured blanket immunity, had leveraged her newly acquired commercial real estate monopoly to rapidly consolidate regional economic power. The brilliant matriarch was currently purchasing distressed industrial assets, establishing a brand new, formidable transportation empire entirely free from the previous familial liabilities. Celine smoothly warned that Patricia possessed an incredibly long, unforgiving memory. The ambitious stepmother viewed the newly wealthy artist as the only remaining legitimate threat to her absolute societal supremacy. The former judge advised her niece to remain extremely vigilant because massive, concentrated wealth always inherently attracts dangerous, unpredictable new predators. A fresh, subtle conflict immediately crystallized upon the horizon, promising future high-stakes battles. The young artist absorbed this valuable cautionary advice, maintaining a calm, unwavering composure. She now possessed the immense, unlimited financial resources necessary to navigate any upcoming adversarial challenges. Celine finished her warm drink and quietly departed, leaving her completely alone inside the spacious, sunlit sanctuary. She walked slowly across the paint-splattered hardwood floorboards, stopping directly in front of a pristine, untouched, blank canvas resting upon the heavy wooden easel. Reaching for a thick glass jar filled with strong chemical solvent, she poured the clear liquid onto a coarse, rough linen rag. She began scrubbing her stained palms with methodical, deliberate movements. She smoothly washed the vibrant crimson pigment away from her skin using the powerful industrial turpentine. The potent solvent dissolved the thick, heavy oil colors, wiping away the last remaining physical traces of the destructive corporate war. The sharp, incredibly clean scent filled the surrounding air, signaling the permanent, undeniable boundary she had successfully established. She stared at the bright white fabric, anticipating the boundless, magnificent future waiting to be painted. The dust settling on a fractured dynasty offers a profound, terrifying clarity to anyone willing to carefully observe the resulting wreckage. When a monumental empire collapses, people instinctively search for complex financial explanations or elaborate legal missteps to make sense of the sudden chaos. They meticulously examine the offshore ledgers, the encrypted bank routing numbers, and the shredded corporate documents, looking for the exact moment the mathematics completely failed. But the true foundation of any lasting institution is never constructed from poured concrete or immense accumulated capital. It is built entirely within the quiet, sacred walls of the family home. The spectacular destruction we just witnessed was not originally born in a sterile corporate boardroom or a high-stakes legal deposition. It was slowly nurtured over several decades around a polished mahogany dining table, where the fundamental principles of healthy parenting were quietly and systematically abandoned. Consider the tragic, isolated figure of the powerful patriarch who engineered this entire catastrophe. He genuinely believed he was fulfilling the ultimate, idealized American dream by constructing an impenetrable financial fortress to house his continuing lineage. In modern, fast-paced American culture, the vital concept of family responsibility is frequently and tragically confused with endless material provision. We are incorrectly taught through relentless societal messaging that leaving a massive, heavy financial inheritance equates to demonstrating profound, unconditional parental love. Yet in his relentless, aggressive pursuit of total industry dominance, he completely neglected the vital, foundational emotional architecture required to raise a healthy, resilient, capable child. He prioritized ruthless ambition and aggressive expansion over fundamental, everyday honesty. He valued blind, unquestioning obedience and rigid loyalty over basic human fairness. He looked directly at his own growing children and saw absolutely nothing more than human assets on a massive corporate balance sheet, calculating their entire worth entirely by their willingness to submit to his absolute, unyielding authority. When a parent teaches a young, impressionable child that human connection is merely a transactional commodity to be traded for temporary advantage, they are quietly planting the deeply rooted, poisonous seeds of their own inevitable destruction. The long-term guidance of children requires an unwavering, courageous commitment to constant emotional awareness. It demands the incredibly difficult daily practice of validating complicated feelings, encouraging independent critical thought, and demonstrating radical personal accountability, even when it hurts deeply. When these essential core values are entirely absent, the resulting psychological vacuum is rapidly filled by deep dysfunction and toxic resentment. Look closely at the delicate siblings caught in this devastating crossfire. One child was meticulously groomed to be an oblivious compliance mechanism, utterly devoid of the critical thinking required to identify a dangerous predator. He was raised entirely inside a gilded golden cage, permanently shielded from all natural consequences. Therefore, he remained entirely incapable of defending himself when true catastrophic danger arrived in the form of a calculating, deceitful spouse. His utter lack of emotional awareness and his complete inability to set healthy boundaries made him the perfect unwitting accomplice to his own spectacular public ruin. Conversely, the other child was aggressively pushed out to the absolute freezing margins of the family unit. When parents actively discriminate favoring one child over another based on simple compliance or perceived utility, they fracture the fundamental sibling bond permanently. They transform brothers and sisters into bitter, vicious rivals, vying desperately for the artificially scarce resource of parental approval. But prolonged isolation breeds an incredibly dangerous hypervigilance. The child cast out into the cold learns to see the world with a terrifying objective clarity. She learned the harsh, unforgiving lessons of fairness, not from her powerful father, but from the stark, painful absence of it. She recognized, through her own profound suffering, that true, genuine family responsibility sometimes means having the incredible courage to burn down the corrupted structure in order to save the innocent working-class lives trapped inside the basement. She understood that true justice often requires stepping completely outside the toxic family system to enforce the rigid boundaries that were never taught at home. This represents the devastating central paradox of the traditional family structure when it becomes deeply infected by unchecked, aggressive greed. The very sacred institution designed by society to provide absolute permanent sanctuary transforms slowly into a suffocating, treacherous battleground. We see this terrifying reality perfectly manifested in the chilling emotional detachment of the brilliant stepmother. A maternal figure within a traditional household is meant to represent unconditional emotional support and a steadfast, unwavering moral compass for the next generation. Instead, she utilized her powerful, intimate position to orchestrate a brilliant, bloodless corporate coup, prioritizing her own massive financial survival over any genuine familial duty. When a household operates entirely on leverage manipulation and hidden agendas, the beautiful concept of family breaks down completely into a tragic collection of isolated, solitary individuals simply waiting for the absolute optimal moment to betray one another for personal gain. Raising capable, resilient children in our highly competitive, heavily demanding modern American society requires a profound conscious shift away from these destructive inherited behavioral patterns. We must actively, consciously choose to build our domestic homes upon the unshakable bedrock of absolute, total honesty and radical transparency. We must deliberately teach our vulnerable sons and daughters that true, enduring strength lies not in the endless accumulation of physical capital or the ruthless pursuit of corporate authority, but in the rare, immense courage to maintain one's strict moral integrity when the entire surrounding world demands quiet, comfortable corruption. We must show them, through our own daily consistent actions, that fairness is not a foolish weakness to be easily exploited by the cunning, but a fundamental, essential human right to be fiercely and permanently protected regardless of the personal cost. If a parent fails to impart these critical, foundational life lessons, the surrounding society will eventually step in and teach them through the harsh, unforgiving mechanical systems of federal legal justice and brutal, humiliating public exposure. The real world does not coddle the emotionally stunted adults we accidentally create through our own selfish parental negligence. The story of this spectacular dramatic downfall serves as a magnificent, terrifying mirror held up directly to our own quiet domestic lives. It forces us to pause and ask deeply uncomfortable, penetrating questions about the subtle, unspoken lessons we are currently imparting to the next vulnerable generation. Are we fostering genuine, robust emotional intelligence, or are we merely demanding silent, easy compliance to make our own lives more convenient? Are we modeling brave, radical transparency, or are we secretly teaching them how to effectively hide their mistakes and failures deep in the dark shadows? The ultimate devastating vengeance is not always a grand public spectacle broadcast brilliantly across a crowded gallery wall. Sometimes the absolute most devastating consequence imaginable is simply watching your own child grow up to become exactly the cold, calculating person you trained them to be, completely devoid of basic human empathy and utterly incapable of experiencing genuine, unconditional love. If you find yourself captivated by these complex, deep psychological explorations, and you deeply wish to continue navigating the intricate, terrifying waters of family dynamics, betrayal, and ultimate justice, I highly encourage you to follow the channel Linda Vengeance. By actively joining our growing community, you will discover an endless reservoir of compelling, fascinating narratives that strip away the glamorous, artificial facades of wealth and power to reveal the raw, beating heart of fundamental human nature. We explore the profound, lasting consequences of broken trusts and the magnificent, inspiring triumphs of those brave individuals who refuse to remain silent, broken victims. Subscribe to Linda Vengeance today and never miss a single magnificent moment of absolute poetic justice. As the sharp scent of turpentine washes the final lingering traces of crimson pigment from the canvas of this particular story, we are left standing alone in the profound, heavy silence of our own daily choices. The massive brick mansions we build may stand tall for a century, but the invisible emotional legacy we leave behind will echo powerfully through eternity. Every single difficult conversation, every disciplined boundary, and every tender moment of shared vulnerability actively shapes the eventual, unchangeable destiny of our children. You might possess the rare, brilliant ability to conquer an entire global industry, but if you cannot conquer the ugly pride and dark deception residing within your own beating heart, you have ultimately secured nothing but a spectacular, inevitable, public defeat. Look closely at the familiar faces gathered around your own dinner table tonight. The true, magnificent empire you are actually building is staring right back at you. Will they become your greatest, most magnificent achievement, or your ultimate, terrifying reckoning? The heavy brush is currently resting completely in your own hands, and the vast canvas remains completely blank, waiting patiently for your next deliberate stroke.